Please comment where you are watching in the world. Please become a channel member to support us. I should have known this date was going to be a disaster the moment he suggested Olive Garden. I mean, no shade to Olive Garden. Unlimited breadsticks are a gift from the gods. But as a first date spot, it's unconventional. Still, I figured, hey, maybe he's quirky. Maybe he's one of those people who doesn't take life too seriously. That's what his profile said, after all. Down to earth, loves to laugh, and always up for an adventure. So to begin, his name was Kyle, and we matched on Tinder about a week before. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but he had that nerdy cute thing going on. Slightly crooked smile, glasses, and a mop of curly brown hair that looked like he just rolled out of bed, in a charming way, not a concerning way. His bio said he worked as a freelance graphic designer and was into hiking, craft beer, and keeping an open mind. I figured he'd be fun to talk to, which was basically all I was looking for at this point. When he suggested Olive Garden, I hesitated for a moment. But then he said, I know it's a little cheesy, but I think it'll be fun. Plus, who doesn't love breadsticks? And honestly, he had a point. Breadsticks are breadsticks. So there I was on a Wednesday night, standing in the parking lot of an Olive Garden, wondering if this was a brilliant idea or the start of a very bad decision. Spoiler, it was the latter. Kyle arrived a few minutes after me, wearing jeans, a slightly wrinkled button-down, and Converse sneakers. He was taller than I expected, which was a nice surprise, and he greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, you made it." Like I'd just crossed the finish line of a marathon. He seemed genuinely excited to be there, and I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. We got seated at a booth near the back, and as soon as we opened our menus, Kyle launched into a passionate speech about why Olive Garden is underrated. People always trash on chain restaurants, he said, waving his hand dismissively. But honestly, they don't get it. Olive Garden is a classic. It's consistent, it's affordable, and it's got that nostalgic vibe, you know? Totally, I said, nodding along. I mean, who doesn't love pasta? Exactly, he said, smiling like I'd just validated his entire worldview. Plus, the breadsticks. You really can't beat the breadsticks. I laughed, thinking, okay, he's a little eccentric, but that's not a bad thing. Maybe this will be fun. And then the conversation took a turn. So, he said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial glint in his eye, what's your take on 5G? I blinked. You mean like the cell towers? Yeah, he said, nodding eagerly. You think they're safe? I guess, I said, unsure of where this was going. I haven't really thought about it. Kyle leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms like he was about to drop some serious knowledge. Most people haven't. That's the problem. They don't want us to think about it. Who's they? I asked, genuinely confused. He glanced around the restaurant like he was checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. The government. The corporations. Big tech. They're all in on it. In on what? I asked, now deeply regretting my life choices. Mind control, he said, as if it were obvious. They're using 5G to control us. To keep us docile. That's why everyone's so addicted to their phones. It's all part of the plan. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. To make matters worse, the waiter showed up at that exact moment to take our order, and Kyle didn't miss a beat. Do you guys filter your water here? He asked. The waiter blinked. I think so. Good, Kyle said, nodding solemnly. Because unfiltered water is full of fluoride, and fluoride is how they keep us complacent. The waiter looked at me, clearly waiting for some kind of explanation. I just smiled awkwardly and ordered the fettuccine alfredo. After the waiter left, Kyle launched into a full-on rant about government conspiracies, ranging from the fake moon landing to chemtrails to how birds aren't real. Yes, you read that correctly. He genuinely believed birds were government drones designed to spy on us. Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? He asked, raising an eyebrow like he'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. I don't think so, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Exactly, he said triumphantly. That's because they don't exist. Think about it, birds are always watching, always listening. It's not a coincidence. At this point, I was seriously considering faking an emergency, but the breadsticks had just arrived, and I felt like I deserved at least one for putting up with this nonsense. So I stayed. Big mistake. By the time our food arrived, Kyle had moved on to ranting about how the Illuminati controls Hollywood. Apparently Beyoncé, Tom Hanks, and Keanu Reeves are all in on it, which is why they never age. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, like his work or hobbies, but every question I asked seemed to lead back to some new conspiracy theory. So, what kind of design work do you do? I asked, hoping for a safe topic. Well, he said, swirling his spaghetti dramatically, I mostly do freelance stuff. Logos, websites, that kind of thing. But that's just my day job. My real passion is uncovering the truth. The truth about what? Everything, he said, his eyes gleaming. The lies we've been fed since birth. Did you know the Earth isn't actually round? I nearly choked on my Alfredo. Wait, are you a flat earther? Not flat, he said, shaking his head. Hollow. The Earth is hollow, and there's an entire advanced civilization living inside it. That's where UFOs come from. They're not aliens, they're inner Earth beings. I had no words. None. By the time the check came, I was mentally and emotionally drained. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to be having the time of his life. This was great, he said, grinning as he handed his card to the waiter. I feel like we really connected. Yeah, I said weakly, forcing a smile. Totally. As we walked out of the restaurant, he turned to me and said, we should do this again sometime. Maybe next time I can show you some of my research. I think you'd really get it. Maybe, I said, already planning to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and immediately texted my best friend. Just went on a date with a guy who thinks birds aren't real. Send help. Her response? At least you got breadsticks. The moral of the story? Unlimited breadsticks aren't worth enduring a 2-hour conspiracy lecture. And if someone suggests Olive Garden for a first date, maybe ask a few follow-up questions. You never know what you're walking into. This story feels like it's straight out of a Lifetime movie, but I swear to you, every word of it is true. If I ever doubted that dating apps could lead to dangerous situations, this guy erased every shred of doubt. It started out as you would expect, but it ended with me triple locking my doors and looking over my shoulder for weeks. His name was Ben, and we matched on Tinder. He was cute enough, dark hair, big smile, and a profile that made him seem totally normal. He was a software engineer, of course, because every other guy in my city is, and his bio mentioned that he loved hiking, cooking, and trying new things. Nothing about him screamed red flag at first glance. In fact, he seemed refreshingly normal compared to some of the people I'd been swiping through. We started chatting, and he was funny, engaging, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of texting, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. It felt low pressure, and I figured why not. We met at a little cafe downtown, and the date was fine. Not amazing, but not terrible either. Ben was a little awkward in person, but I chalked that up to nerves. He told me about his job, his love of cooking. He claimed to make the best lasagna on the planet, and his dream of one day backpacking through Europe. He asked me a lot of questions about myself, which I appreciated, though his intensity was a little off-putting. He'd lean in close, nodding earnestly at everything I said, as if he were taking mental notes. At the end of the date, he asked if I wanted to go out again. I hesitated but agreed, thinking maybe he'd loosen up a bit once we got to know each other better. That was my first mistake. Over the next few days, Ben started texting me constantly. And I mean constantly. At first, it was cute. Good morning. Texts when I woke up, funny memes throughout the day, and little updates about his life. But then it got overwhelming. If I didn't respond within an hour, he'd send follow-ups like, "Hey, everything okay?" Or "Did I say something wrong?" One night, I was out with friends and didn't check my phone for a few hours. When I finally looked, I had 14 texts from Ben. 14. They started out normal. "Hey, how's your night going?" But quickly escalated to, "Why aren't you answering?" and "Are you mad at me?" By the time I got home, he'd sent, "I guess you're not interested anymore. Just let me know so I can stop wasting my time." I should have ended things right then and there, but I didn't. I felt bad, he seemed sensitive, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings. So I sent a polite reply, saying I'd been out with friends and hadn't been on my phone. He immediately responded with a long apology about how he was just really into me and didn't want to mess things up. Against my better judgment, I let it slide. Our second date was where things started to get really weird. He picked me up for dinner, and as soon as I got in the car, I noticed that he had a playlist titled my name, S favorites playing through the speakers. I laughed nervously and said, "Wow, did you make this for me?" "Of course," he said, grinning. "I remembered everything you said you liked. Taylor Swift, The Killers, a little bit of classic rock. I wanted it to feel special. It was sweet, I guess, but also kind of unsettling. We'd only been on one date, and he'd already curated a personalized playlist for me. It felt like a level of effort that was disproportionate to the fact that we barely knew each other. At dinner, he started talking about the future, our future. He mentioned how his lease was up in a few months and joked, I think, about how he'd need to find a place big enough for both of us. He also brought up meeting his family, saying how much his mom would love me. I laughed it off, trying to change the subject, but he kept circling back to it. By the end of the night, I knew I couldn't keep seeing him. He was moving way too fast, and his intensity was starting to freak me out. But I didn't know how to tell him without causing a scene, so I said I'd text him later. When I got home, I sent him a message saying I didn't think we were a good match, and that I didn't want to lead him on. I tried to keep it polite but firm. His response? A novel. He sent a wall of text about how he thought we had something special, how he'd never felt this way about anyone before, and how he was willing to do anything to make it work. I didn't reply. That's when the real nightmare began. The next morning, I woke up to a text from him. Good morning. I'm outside. Can we talk? Outside? I ran to my window, and sure enough, there he was, standing on the sidewalk in front of my building, holding a coffee cup and looking up at my apartment. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told him where I lived, so how did he find me? I ignored the text, hoping he'd get the hint and leave. But he didn't. He stayed there for hours, sending me messages like, I just want to talk, and please, I know we can work this out. I finally called a friend, who came over to walk me out of the building. When Ben saw me, he tried to approach, but my friend stepped in and told him to back off. He left, but not before shouting, "You're making a mistake," as we walked away. Over the next few days, he kept texting and calling, alternating between apologizing and accusing me of leading him on. I blocked his number, but then he started messaging me on Instagram. When I blocked him there, he created a new account. Then another, and another. It was like he couldn't take a hint, or wouldn't. The final straw came when he showed up at my work. I was sitting at my desk when my coworker came over and said, "Hey, there's a guy in the lobby asking for you." My heart sank. I told security not to let him up, and thankfully they escorted him out. But the fact that he'd gone to the trouble of finding out where I worked was terrifying. I ended up filing a police report and changing my phone number. For weeks, I was paranoid that he'd show up again, but thankfully he eventually stopped. I have no idea what finally made him give up, and honestly, I don't want to know. I should have known this date was going to be a disaster the moment he suggested Olive Garden. I mean, no shade to Olive Garden. Unlimited breadsticks are a gift from the gods. But as a first date spot, it's unconventional. Still, I figured, hey, maybe he's quirky. Maybe he's one of those people who doesn't take life too seriously. That's what his profile said, after all. Down to earth, loves to laugh, and always up for an adventure. So to begin, his name was Kyle, and we matched on Tinder about a week before. He wasn't traditionally handsome, but he had that nerdy cute thing going on. Slightly crooked smile, glasses, and a mop of curly brown hair that looked like he just rolled out of bed, in a charming way, not a concerning way. His bio said he worked as a freelance graphic designer and was into hiking, craft beer, and keeping an open mind. I figured he'd be fun to talk to, which was basically all I was looking for at this point. When he suggested Olive Garden, I hesitated for a moment. But then he said, "I know it's a little cheesy, but I think it'll be fun. Plus, who doesn't love breadsticks?" And honestly, he had a point. Breadsticks are breadsticks. So there I was on a Wednesday night, standing in the parking lot of an Olive Garden, wondering if this was a brilliant idea or the start of a very bad decision. Spoiler, it was the latter. Kyle arrived a few minutes after me, wearing jeans, a slightly wrinkled button-down, and Converse sneakers. He was taller than I expected, which was a nice surprise, and he greeted me with a cheerful, "Hey, you made it." Like I'd just crossed the finish line of a marathon. He seemed genuinely excited to be there, and I thought, okay, maybe this won't be so bad. We got seated at a booth near the back, and as soon as we opened our menus, Kyle launched into a passionate speech about why Olive Garden is underrated. "People always trash on chain restaurants," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "But honestly, they don't get it. Olive Garden is a classic. It's consistent, it's affordable, and it's got that nostalgic vibe, you know?" "Totally," I said, nodding along. "I mean, who doesn't love pasta?" "Exactly," he said, smiling like I'd just validated his entire worldview. "Plus, the breadsticks. You really can't beat the breadsticks." I laughed, thinking, okay, he's a little eccentric, but that's not a bad thing. Maybe this will be fun. And then the conversation took a turn. "So, he said, leaning forward with a conspiratorial glint in his eye. What's your take on 5G? I blinked. You mean like the cell towers? Yeah, he said, nodding eagerly. You think they're safe? I guess, I said, unsure of where this was going. I haven't really thought about it. Kyle leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms like he was about to drop some serious knowledge. Most people haven't. That's the problem. They don't want us to think about it. Who's they? I asked, genuinely confused. He glanced around the restaurant like he was checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. The government. The corporations. Big tech. They're all in on it. In on what? I asked, now deeply regretting my life choices. Mind control, he said, as if it were obvious. They're using 5G to control us. To keep us docile. That's why everyone's so addicted to their phones. It's all part of the plan. I stared at him, unsure if he was joking. He wasn't. To make matters worse, the waiter showed up at that exact moment to take our order, and Kyle didn't miss a beat. Do you guys filter your water here? He asked. The waiter blinked. I think so. Good, Kyle said, nodding solemnly. Because unfiltered water is full of fluoride, and fluoride is how they keep us complacent. The waiter looked at me, clearly waiting for some kind of explanation. I just smiled awkwardly and ordered the fettuccine alfredo. After the waiter left, Kyle launched into a full-on rant about government conspiracies, ranging from the fake moon landing to chemtrails to how birds aren't real. Yes, you read that correctly. He genuinely believed birds were government drones designed to spy on us. Have you ever seen a baby pigeon? He asked, raising an eyebrow like he'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. I don't think so, I said, trying to keep a straight face. Exactly, he said triumphantly. That's because they don't exist. Think about it, birds are always watching, always listening. It's not a coincidence. At this point, I was seriously considering faking an emergency, but the breadsticks had just arrived, and I felt like I deserved at least one for putting up with this nonsense. So I stayed. Big mistake. By the time our food arrived, Kyle had moved on to ranting about how the Illuminati controls Hollywood. Apparently Beyoncé, Tom Hanks, and Keanu Reeves are all in on it, which is why they never age. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, like his work or hobbies, but every question I asked seemed to lead back to some new conspiracy theory. So, what kind of design work do you do? I asked, hoping for a safe topic. Well, he said, swirling his spaghetti dramatically, I mostly do freelance stuff. Logos, websites, that kind of thing. But that's just my day job. My real passion is uncovering the truth. The truth about what? Everything, he said, his eyes gleaming. The lies we've been fed since birth. Did you know the Earth isn't actually round? I nearly choked on my Alfredo. Wait, are you a flat earther? Not flat, he said, shaking his head. Hollow. The Earth is hollow, and there's an entire advanced civilization living inside it. That's where UFOs come from. They're not aliens, they're inner-Earth beings. I had no words. None. By the time the check came, I was mentally and emotionally drained. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed to be having the time of his life. This was great, he said, grinning as he handed his card to the waiter. I feel like we really connected. Yeah, I said weakly, forcing a smile. Totally. As we walked out of the restaurant, he turned to me and said, we should do this again sometime. Maybe next time I can show you some of my research. I think you'd really get it. Maybe, I said, already planning to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch and immediately texted my best friend. Just went on a date with a guy who thinks birds aren't real. Send help. Her response? At least you got breadsticks. The moral of the story? Unlimited breadsticks aren't worth enduring a 2-hour conspiracy lecture. And if someone suggests Olive Garden for a first date, maybe ask a few follow-up questions. You never know what you're walking into. I'll be honest, I was kind of excited about this date at first. I'd matched with this guy, Liang, on Hinge, and he seemed like a breath of fresh air compared to the usual guys I approach of Hinge. He was originally from Guangzhou, China, and had moved to San Francisco a few years ago to work as a chef. A chef? I love food, and I'd never dated a chef before, so I was already picturing cute dates where he'd cook me amazing meals and teach me about all kinds of dishes I'd never tried before. We decided to meet for dinner at RNG Lounge, a popular Chinese seafood restaurant in San Francisco that I'd been dying to try. I figured it was the perfect setting for a first date, great food, lively atmosphere, and a chance to see what he was like in his element. I even joked with him over text that he'd have to approve my order, given that he was the expert. When I arrived at the restaurant, he was already waiting for me out front. He looked just like his photos, short, slim, wearing a crisp button-up shirt and jeans. He had this warm, easygoing smile that instantly put me at ease. As we walked inside and got seated, I thought, okay, this is off to a great start. The first half hour of the date was amazing. Liang was funny, charming, and so passionate about food. He told me about his journey as a chef, how he grew up learning to cook with his grandmother, and how much he loved introducing people to traditional Chinese dishes. He even told me about some of the more unusual ingredients he'd worked with over the years, like jellyfish and sea cucumbers. I was fascinated. I mean, I'm no stranger to adventurous eating. I'd tried octopus and frog legs before, but this sounded next level. Then the conversation took a turn. "So," he said, leaning forward with a glint in his eye, "how adventurous are you when it comes to food?" I laughed. "Pretty adventurous, I think. I mean, I'll try almost anything once." He smiled, clearly pleased with that answer. "That's good. A lot of people are too afraid to try real food. They want safe, boring dishes, but they miss out on the best flavors. Right?" I said, nodding enthusiastically. "I feel like the best food is always the stuff that feels a little out of your comfort zone." "Exactly," he said. "Like live food." I paused, not sure if I'd heard him correctly. "Live food?" "Yes," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You know, like live shrimp, live octopus, live insects. The freshness makes all the difference." I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Wait, you mean like eating them while they're still alive?" "Of course," he said, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "It's very common in China. You can taste the life in the food. It's so fresh, so pure." I didn't know what to say. I'd seen videos online of people eating live octopus in Korea, but I always assumed it was one of those extreme food challenges, not something people did casually. And insects? I'd heard of fried crickets and mealworms, but alive? My stomach churned at the thought. "Have you ever tried it?" he asked, clearly excited. No," I said, forcing a laugh. "I think the closest I've gotten is sushi." He chuckled. "Sushi is good, but it's not the same. You should try live shrimp sometime. They're still moving when you eat them. The texture is amazing." I smiled weakly, praying the waiter would show up and save me from this conversation. But Liang wasn't done. "One time," he continued, "I had live scorpions in Beijing. They were incredible. You just grab them by the tail so they don't sting you, and you pop them in your mouth. The crunch is so satisfying." I felt my jaw drop. "Wait, you've eaten live scorpions?" "Oh, many times," he said, waving it off like it was nothing. "And live frogs, too. They cut them up right in front of you, and you eat them while the heart is still beating. It's the freshest meat you can get." I stared at him, trying to keep my face neutral, but internally I was screaming. What the actual hell is happening right now? "I mean, that sounds intense," I said, choosing my words carefully. "It's not for everyone," he admitted, his tone almost condescending. "But once you try it, you'll never want to go back to cooked food." At that moment, the waiter arrived to take our order, and I practically threw myself into the menu to avoid making eye contact with him. I ordered something safe, a plate of salt and pepper prawns, and prayed he wouldn't judge me for not asking for them alive and flopping on the plate. Liang, on the other hand, ordered the live crab, which the waiter assured him would be extremely fresh. When the food arrived, I couldn't even focus on my own dish. I was too distracted watching Liang expertly dismantle the crab, which was still twitching slightly. He popped a piece into his mouth and closed his eyes, savoring it like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. "You have to try this," he said, holding out a piece of crab meat with his chopsticks. "Oh no, I'm good," I said quickly, waving him off. "This is plenty for me." "Are you sure?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "You said you were adventurous." "I am," I said, forcing a smile. "But maybe not that adventurous." He shrugged and went back to his meal, but I could tell he was disappointed. Meanwhile, I was sitting there wondering how I'd gone from imagining cute chef-boyfriend vibes to contemplating whether I'd survive eating a live scorpion. By the time the check came, I knew there wasn't going to be a second date. Liang was sweet, but I couldn't get past the whole eating live animals thing. It wasn't just the idea of it, it was the way he talked about it, like it was some kind of moral superiority. Like anyone who didn't want to eat a live frog was weak or boring. I didn't say anything, though. I just smiled, thanked him for dinner, and made a mental note to block his number as soon as I got home. When I finally got back to my apartment, I sat on the couch and texted my best friend about the whole ordeal. Her response was immediate: "Girl, run. And maybe become a vegetarian." I don't even know where to start with this one. It wasn't just the worst date I've ever been on. It was downright terrifying. So I matched with this guy, Matt, on OkCupid. He seemed interesting. Not in a bad way, just in a wow, you're really into niche stuff EY kind of way. His profile said he was a history teacher in Portland, originally from Seattle, and he had a thing for true crime documentaries. Which, okay, who doesn't? Making a Murderer basically united the entire country for a month. I figured he was just one of those artsy, intellectual types who liked to read about weird historical events and watch Netflix specials about bank robbers and true crime. Our conversations were great and engaging. He had this dry wit that I really appreciated, and when he suggested meeting up for coffee at Guava Coffee Roasters, one of the more bougie spots in Portland, I thought, why not? A guy who drinks overpriced, single-origin coffee can't be that bad, right? Wrong. So wrong. When I got there, Matt was already sitting at a table with his coffee. He looked normal, tall, clean-cut, glasses that gave him a slightly nerdy vibe. I liked it. I grabbed a latte, sat down across from him, and for the first half hour, everything was fine. Great, even. We talked about work, our favorite books, and how Portland's weather was finally starting to clear up. He had this calm, almost soothing energy about him that made me feel comfortable, like I could really relax and enjoy the conversation. Then he brought up his hobby. "So," he said, leaning forward with this little glint in his eye, "you mentioned you like true crime, right?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I mean, I wouldn't say I'm obsessed or anything, but I've definitely gone down the occasional rabbit hole." He grinned. "Me too. Except, well, I guess I'm more than just a casual fan." "Oh," I asked, taking a sip of my latte. "How so?" "Well," he said, almost shyly, "I have this project I've been working on. It's kind of a passion of mine. Now, I'm a curious person by nature. So when someone tells me they have a project, I lean in." "What kind of project?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I study serial killers. Like, in depth. Their methods, their psychology, their patterns. I've been researching them for years." I froze, my latte halfway to my mouth. "Oh, wow. That's intense." "It is," he said, nodding enthusiastically. "But it's so fascinating. Like, did you know that Ted Bundy used to fake injuries to lure his victims? Or that Ed Gein-inspired Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Silence of the Lambs? The way their minds work is just incredible." He said this with such excitement, like he was talking about his favorite sports team or a new video game he couldn't put down. And for a second I thought, okay, maybe this is just his quirky thing. People are into weird stuff. It's not a deal breaker. But then he kept going, and going, and going. For the next 20 minutes, Matt gave me a TED talk on the greatest hits of serial killers throughout history. He talked about their body counts, their preferred methods, which ones had cool nicknames, his words, not mine, and even ranked them by how creative they were. I just sat there, nodding occasionally, trying to keep my face from showing the absolute horror I was feeling. I wanted to say something, anything, to change the subject, but he was so passionate about it, I didn't know how to interrupt. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've always thought if I were going to do it, I'd probably go the Zodiac Killer route. You know, keep it mysterious. Make it a game." I stared at him, my heart racing. "If you were going to do it..." He laughed. "Oh, I'm not saying I would. I'm just saying, hypothetically, if I ever decided to, I think that'd be the way to go. It's all about the challenge, you know? Outsmarting everyone. Leaving clues. Making people wonder." I forced a laugh, hoping I misheard him. Yeah, hypothetically." He smiled at me like we were sharing some kind of inside joke. "Exactly. Hypothetically." At this point, I was fully creeped out, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he was just trying to be funny in a really, really bad way. Maybe he didn't realize how insane he sounded. I figured I'd finish my latte, make an excuse to leave, and never see him again. But then he invited me back to his place. "I've got this collection of books and case files," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You'd love it. I've even got a map where I've been tracking unsolved cases. It's a work in progress, but it's pretty cool." My brain screamed, "Do not go to this man's house." That's really cool," I said, lying through my teeth. "But I actually have to get going soon. I've got an early morning tomorrow." His face fell. "Oh, come on. Just for a little bit. I'll show you my favorite case. It's about this guy who... I really can't, I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. But thanks for the coffee. It was interesting. He looked disappointed but didn't argue, which was honestly a relief. I practically sprinted out of the cafe, my heart pounding as I made my way back to my car. I was halfway home when curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over, grabbed my phone, and Googled his name. Nothing came up. No social media, no LinkedIn, nothing. It was like he didn't exist. That's when I remembered something he'd said during our conversation. How he didn't like having an online presence because you never know who's watching. At the time, I thought it was just a quirky, paranoid thing to say. Now it felt like a giant red flag. When I got home, I blocked his number and deleted OkCupid. But the story doesn't end there. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Matt. Just wondering if you wanted to grab coffee again. I have some new stuff to show you. I deleted the text and blocked the number. Then I spent the rest of the night triple checking that all my doors and windows were locked. To this day, I still think about that date and wonder what might have happened if I'd gone back to his place. Would I have seen his collection? Would I have found out what was really on that map? Or would I have ended up as just another name on it? Let me start by saying that I usually don't get drunk on first dates. I like to keep things light, flirty, and mostly sober, so I can actually assess whether the person is worth my time. But that night was different. It was one of those dates where everything just clicked, until it didn't. His name was Jake, and we met on Bumble. He had that effortlessly cool vibe, messy blonde hair, sharp jawline, and a smile that made you feel like you were in on some inside joke. His profile said he was a graphic designer, loved live music, and was looking for someone to share late-night tacos with. I mean, come on, how could I resist? We had been chatting for about a week, and the banter was so good. He was funny, quick-witted, and made me laugh in a way that felt genuine. So when he asked me out for drinks at this hip little dive bar downtown, I said yes without hesitation. The date started off great. Jake was even hotter in person, tall, easygoing, and had this laid-back charm that made me feel instantly comfortable. We grabbed a couple of beers and settled into one of those booths with the sticky vinyl seats that scream, "Bad decisions will be made here." The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything, our favorite movies, embarrassing childhood stories, and how we both secretly loved trashy reality TV. One drink turned into two, then three, and before I knew it, we were doing tequila shots and laughing like old friends. I don't even like tequila, but in the moment, it felt like the right thing to do. I remember thinking, this is fun. He's fun. What could go wrong? Well, a lot, apparently. By the time the bar was closing, we were both a little too tipsy to drive, so Jake suggested getting an Uber back to his place. I hesitated for about half a second before agreeing. I mean, the chemistry was electric, and I was definitely feeling bold after all those drinks. Plus, he lived nearby, and my drunk brain decided that was a perfectly logical reason to go home with a guy I'd just met. When we got to his apartment, things escalated quickly. One minute we were sitting on his couch, laughing about some stupid meme he'd shown me on his phone, and the next we were making out like teenagers at prom. It was hot, it was impulsive, and before I knew it, we were in his bed. To spare you the details, let's just say the night was memorable. In the best way. But then, as we were lying there afterward, still catching our breath, Jake turned to me with this serious look on his face. "Hey," he said, his voice slurred from the alcohol. There's something I need to tell you." My stomach did a little flip. "Okay, what is it?" He opened his mouth like he was about to say something, then stopped. His eyes fluttered shut, and within seconds, he was out cold. "Jake," I said, nudging him. "Nothing." He was completely passed out. I stared at him for a moment, my drunk brain struggling to piece together what had just happened. What was he trying to tell me? Was it something bad? Or was he about to say something sweet, like, "I think you're amazing"? I had no idea. And as much as I wanted to shake him awake and demand answers, I was too tired and too drunk to care. So I rolled over and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window and a pounding headache that made me instantly regret my life choices. Jake was still asleep beside me, snoring softly. For a moment, I debated sneaking out, but then I remembered his cryptic, "I need to tell you something" comment from the night before. When he finally woke up, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, sipping a glass of water he'd left on the nightstand. "Morning," he said groggily, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. So about last night, you said you needed to tell me something. Jake froze, his eyes widening ever so slightly. Oh, yeah. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. Well, he sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. Okay, so this is kind of awkward, but I have herpes. I stared at him, my mind going completely blank. What? I have herpes, he repeated, his voice calm but apologetic. I've had it for a couple of years now. I take medication, and I haven't had an outbreak in a while, so the risk is really low, but yeah. I blinked, my brain struggling to process what he was saying. Wait, so you knew this last night? Yeah, he said quickly, his expression turning defensive. I was going to tell you, I swear. I didn't know how to bring it up. And then we were drinking, and everything happened so fast, and Jake, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You should have told me before we had sex. Not after. I know, he said, looking genuinely remorseful. I didn't want to ruin the moment. And I was drunk, and... That's not an excuse, I said, my voice rising slightly. You had plenty of chances to tell me. You could have said something at the bar, or when we got to your apartment, or literally any time before we got into bed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair again. You're right. I screwed up. I should have told you. I really like you, and I didn't want to scare you off. I stared at him, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. I appreciated that he was being honest now, but the damage was already done. He'd taken away my ability to make an informed decision, and that wasn't okay. I need to go, I said, standing up and grabbing my clothes. Wait, Jake said, reaching for my arm. Can we talk about this? I really like you, and I don't want this to ruin things between us. I shook my head, pulling away. I need some time to think. I'll text you later. I left his apartment feeling a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, and a sinking sense of betrayal. When I got home, I immediately called my doctor to schedule an appointment and spent the rest of the day Googling everything I could about herpes. Jake texted me later, apologizing again and saying he hoped I'd give him another chance. But honestly, I couldn't. It wasn't just about the STI, it was about trust. And if he couldn't be honest with me when it mattered most, how could I trust him with anything else? First dates can be awkward. That's a given. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the absolute train wreck that was my first and only date with Tyler, the guy who thought the gym was the perfect place to kick off a potential romance. Tyler and I matched on Hinge, and at first, he seemed like a decent guy. His profile was full of shirtless hiking photos, and him holding a deadlift bar loaded with what looked like a ridiculous amount of weight. His bio said something like, looking for someone who can keep up, and while I'm not a total gym rat, I figured maybe he was just one of those super active outdoorsy types. I wasn't scared off, yet. We started chatting, and he was surprisingly charming. He made me laugh, seemed genuinely interested in my hobbies, and didn't immediately launch into unsolicited fitness advice like I've seen gym bros do before. After a few days of texting, he asked if I wanted to meet up on Saturday. Sure, I said. Any ideas? How about the gym? He replied. It's the ultimate first date. We can bond over some squats and endorphins. Plus, it's a great way to see if we're compatible. Now, I'm all for breaking the mold when it comes to first dates. Coffee shops are fine, dinner is fine, but the gym? It felt unconventional. But I thought, hey, maybe he's onto something. Maybe this'll be fun. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The day of the date arrived, and I threw on my best workout gear, black leggings, a supportive tank top, and sneakers that had seen better days but still did the job. I wasn't trying to impress him with my gym fashion. I just wanted to survive the hour. I showed up at the gym he suggested, a big, intimidating place that smelled like rubber mats and protein powder, and found Tyler waiting near the entrance. He was exactly as I imagined, tall, muscular, wearing a tank top that showed off every inch of his biceps. He gave me a big, pulley white smile and said, "Hey, you ready to crush it?" Sure," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. We started with a warm-up on the treadmill, and I figured, okay, this isn't so bad. He chatted while we jogged, asking me about my job and my favorite travel spots. I was starting to think maybe this whole gym date idea wasn't the worst thing in the world. Then we moved to the weights. "Let's start with some squats," Tyler said, leading me over to a squat rack. "How's your form?" "Pretty decent, I think," I said, trying to sound confident. I wasn't exactly a powerlifter, but I'd done my fair share of squats in yoga class. "Cool," he said. Let me see. I got into position and did a squat, feeling a little self-conscious with him watching me so closely. When I came back up, he shook his head. Yeah, no, he said. Your form's all wrong. You're not going low enough. And your knees are caving in a little. Do it again. I blinked. Okay. I tried again, feeling heat rise to my cheeks as he stared at me like a personal trainer who was deeply disappointed in his client. When I was done, he sighed. You've got potential, he said, but you've got a lot of work to do. You're probably not activating your glutes properly. That's why your legs look a little soft. I froze. Excuse me? Don't get me wrong, he said quickly, as if that would somehow make it better. You've got a nice body, but you could be so much more toned if you focused on your lower body strength. Like, your glutes could really pop if you worked on them more. I stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. He wasn't. Let's move on to deadlifts, he said, completely oblivious to the fact that he'd just insulted me. You're gonna love this one. It's great for your back and hamstrings. And, posture is everything. I should have walked out right then and there, but for some reason I didn't. Maybe I was too stunned. Maybe I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Either way, I followed him to the deadlift station, where he proceeded to load the bar with way more weight than I could lift in a million years. Let's start light, he said, completely serious. This is just 135 pounds. I'm sure you can handle it. I don't think I can lift that, I said, laughing nervously. Sure you can, he said, grinning. You just need to push yourself. Don't let your mind hold you back. I was about to protest again when he added, unless you're not used to pushing yourself. I mean, it's fine if you're new to this. Everyone starts somewhere. That was it. That was the moment I realized this guy didn't just love the gym. He was obsessed with it. And not in a healthy, fitness is my passion kind of way. This was a guy who clearly believed that anyone who didn't spend half their life deadlifting was somehow inferior. I stood there, staring at the barbell, and decided I was done. Done with the gym, done with Tyler, done with this entire ridiculous date. Yeah, I think I'm good, I said, grabbing my water bottle. He looked up, confused. Wait, what? We're just getting started. No, you're just getting started, I said, slinging my bag over my shoulder. But I'm done. Thanks for the workout tips, though. Wait, he said, stepping toward me. Don't take it personally. I'm just trying to help you improve. You've got potential, I swear. Yeah, well, I didn't come here to be critiqued, I shot back. I came here to get to know you. And honestly, I've seen enough. I walked out of the gym, my cheeks burning with a mix of embarrassment and anger. As soon as I got to my car, I texted my best friend, never let me go on a gym date again. Ever. Tyler texted me later, saying he was sorry if I came off too strong, and that he was just passionate about helping people reach their fitness goals. I didn't reply. I deleted his number and blocked him on Hinge. I don't even know where to start with this one. It wasn't the worst date I've ever been on, not by a long shot, that is for another story. But it was definitely the most emotionally draining. I've got nothing against vulnerability or people who wear their hearts on their sleeves. But there's a difference between being open and, well, whatever this was. His name was Nathan, and we matched on Bumble. He had this sweet, almost shy vibe in his photos, messy brown hair, kind eyes, and a soft smile that made him look like the kind of guy who volunteers at animal shelters or teaches kids how to read. His profile said he was a freelance writer who loved indie films, hiking, and finding quiet moments in a loud world. I thought, finally, someone who seems thoughtful and emotionally mature. Little did I know, I was about to get more emotions than I'd ever signed up for. Nathan and I started chatting, and he was nice. Just nice. Not wildly funny or flirtatious, but kind and genuine in a way that felt like a breath of fresh air. After a few days of exchanging messages about our favorite books and movies, he asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. It felt like a safe, low-pressure first date, and I'd been trying to put myself out there more, so I said yes. We met at this cozy little cafe in the artsy part of town, and at first, everything seemed fine. Nathan was a little quieter in person, but he had this gentle, almost endearing energy that made me feel at ease. We ordered our drinks, settled into a corner table, and started chatting. He asked me about my job, my hobbies, and my family, and I could tell he was really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk. It was nice. Again, just nice. But then, about 20 minutes into the date, I noticed his eyes were getting watery. Are you okay? I asked, genuinely concerned. Yeah, he said, forcing a small smile. I'm sorry. It's been a really hard year. Oh, I said, leaning forward. I'm sorry to hear that. What's been going on? And that's when the floodgates opened. Nathan launched into a tearful monologue about how his ex-girlfriend had broken up with him 6 months ago, leaving him heartbroken and questioning everything. He talked about how he'd been struggling with depression, how he felt like he wasn't good enough, and how hard it had been to put himself back out there. He wasn't just tearing up anymore, he was full-on crying, right there in the middle of the cafe. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I felt terrible for him. Clearly, he was going through a lot, and I didn't want to be the kind of person who shuts someone down for being emotional. On the other hand, I barely knew this guy, and it felt a little overwhelming to be thrust into the role of his therapist. It sounds like you've been through a lot, I said gently, handing him a napkin. I'm really sorry you're feeling this way. Thanks, he said, dabbing at his eyes. I'm sorry for dumping all of this on you. I haven't really had anyone to talk to about it. It's okay, I said, even though it wasn't really okay. Have you thought about talking to someone, like a therapist? I probably should, he said, sniffling. But it's just so hard, you know? Sometimes it feels like no one really understands. He looked at me then, with this pleading expression that made my stomach twist. Suddenly, it felt like he was looking for me to be the person who understood. And while I wanted to help him, I could feel myself starting to shut down. It was too much, too soon. You see, what Nathan didn't know was that I'd been dealing with my own grief. Just a few months ago, I'd lost my mom. It was sudden and devastating, and I was still trying to navigate the waves of sadness that hit me out of nowhere. I'd gone on this date hoping for a distraction, something light and fun to remind me that life could still be good. Instead, I was sitting across from a guy who was pouring his heart out, and it felt like I was carrying both of our emotions on my shoulders. As the date went on, Nathan continued to share more about his struggles, his insecurities, his fears, his regrets. I nodded, listened, and offered words of encouragement where I could, but inside I was starting to feel like I was drowning. The date didn't feel like a date anymore. It felt like I was mothering him, holding him up while I was barely holding myself together. When he finally ran out of things to say, there was a long, awkward pause. He looked at me like he was waiting for me to say something profound, something that would make everything better. But I didn't have anything left to give. Listen, I said carefully. I think it's really brave of you to be so open about what you're going through. But I'm not sure I'm in the right place to give you what you need right now. His face fell. Oh, did I mess this up? No, it's not that, I said quickly. It's just, I've been through a lot recently too, and I don't think I'm in a place to take on someone else's pain. I'm really sorry. He nodded, looking down at his coffee cup. I get it. I guess I'm just not ready for this. It's okay, I said, even though it wasn't entirely okay. You should focus on yourself right now. Maybe take some time to heal, you know? Yeah, he said quietly. You're probably right. We finished the date on a somber note, and I left the cafe feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because I genuinely wanted to help him, and relief because I knew I couldn't. Not now. Not when I was still trying to heal myself. Nathan texted me later, thanking me for being so understanding and apologizing for ruining the date. I told him he didn't ruin anything, and that I wished him the best, but I didn't respond to any of his messages after that. I knew I couldn't be what he needed, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I swear, I had no idea the universe could be this cruel. When I agreed to go on a date with Ryan, I never in my wildest dreams imagined it would involve bodily fluids. And not the good kind. But let me start at the beginning. Ryan and I had met on Coffee Meets Bagel, of all places, which, in hindsight, feels like the universe playing a sick joke. He was cute, short brown hair, a scruffy beard, and warm hazel eyes that made you feel like he'd really listen. His profile said he was a teacher in Chicago, originally from Milwaukee, and he loved hiking, trying new food spots, and trivia nights. He seemed normal, which was already a win in the dating trenches. After a week of texting, he asked if I wanted to grab dinner at the Purple Pig, a popular spot on Michigan Avenue known for its tapas. I'd been wanting to go there forever, so the foodie in me jumped at the chance. Plus, Ryan seemed sweet. I was actually looking forward to meeting him. The day of the date, I got a text from him. Hey, I'm feeling a little under the weather, but I'd still love to meet if you're okay with it. Now looking back, I should have taken this as my cue to reschedule. But at the time I thought, he's making an effort. How bad could it be? So I told him I didn't mind, and that I'd see him there. Big mistake. I showed up at the Purple Pig a little early and grabbed a seat at the bar while I waited for him. The place was buzzing, dim lighting, the smell of roasted pork belly wafting through the air, and the faint hum of conversation all around me. It was cozy, and I was starting to feel excited. But when Ryan walked in, I immediately knew something was off. He looked awful. His face was pale, his eyes were watery, and he was clutching a balled-up tissue like it was a lifeline. "Hey," he said, his voice thick and congested, as he gave me a weak smile. "Thanks for meeting me. Are you sure you're okay?" I asked, trying to sound polite, but also quietly horrified. He looked like he'd just crawled out of the plague pit. Yeah, he said, waving me off. "It's just a little cold. I'll be fine." I wanted to bolt right then and there, but I didn't. Why? Because I'm too damn nice. Instead, I followed him to our table, mentally preparing myself to spend the next hour pretending not to notice the germs radiating off him like a biohazard warning sign. The first 10 minutes weren't too bad. We ordered drinks, just water for him, obviously, and started looking at the menu. But as he was explaining his favorite dishes, he let out the loudest sneeze I've ever heard in my life. It was sudden, violent, and completely uncontained. I froze, my eyes wide, as I watched the aftermath in slow motion. He didn't even bother to cover his mouth. Instead, he grabbed his tissue after the fact and wiped his nose, leaving a horrifying spray of God knows what all over the table. And unfortunately me. "Bless you," I said weakly, trying to muster all the politeness I had left while resisting the urge to bathe in hand sanitizer. "Oh, sorry about that," he mumbled, sniffling loudly. "I've been sneezing all day." "No shit, Ryan." I wanted to tell him this was a terrible idea. I wanted to say, hey, maybe next time, stay home and don't infect innocent people while they're trying to enjoy tapas. But instead, I just sat there, dabbing at my sleeve with a napkin and praying the waiter would show up soon to rescue me. When the food finally arrived, I thought, okay, maybe this will distract me. Maybe I can just focus on the food and get through this. And for a moment, it worked. The dishes were incredible. Charred broccoli with ricotta, crispy pig ears, and the most amazing bone marrow I'd ever tasted. I was starting to think, maybe this isn't so bad. But then it happened. Ryan let out another sneeze, this one bigger than the last, and this time, it landed directly in his food. And not just his food, mine too. I stared at the plate of broccoli in front of me, now glistening with a fresh layer of Ryan's misery, and I swear I felt my soul leave my body. "Oh my God," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Sorry," he said, grabbing his tissue again. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," I said quickly, cutting him off. It was not fine, but I didn't trust myself to say anything else without completely losing it. I pushed my plate away, suddenly very aware of every germ in a 5-mile radius, and told him I wasn't hungry anymore. He looked genuinely apologetic, which made me feel bad for being so annoyed, but also, come on. Who shows up to a date when they're clearly patient zero in some apocalyptic flu outbreak? The rest of the night was a blur of sniffling, sneezing, and awkward small talk. I tried to focus on what he was saying, but all I could think about was how quickly I could get out of there without seeming rude. When the check finally came, I practically threw my credit card at the waiter just to speed things up. As we walked out of the restaurant, Ryan turned to me and said, "This was really fun. I'd love to do it again sometime." I stared at him, trying to decide if he was joking. "Yeah," I said weakly because apparently I'm incapable of being honest in the moment. "We'll see." He leaned in for a hug, and I panicked. I turned my head at the last second, so instead of a hug, it turned into this weird, awkward shoulder bump that left both of us confused. But at least I avoided direct contact with his germ-infested hands. When I got home, I immediately threw my dress in the laundry, scrubbed my arms like I was prepping for surgery, and gargled with mouthwash just to be safe. I blocked Ryan's number before my hands had even dried. The next morning, I woke up with a sore throat. This date still gives me chills when I think about it, not because anything truly terrifying happened, but because I walked away feeling like I'd just scratched the surface of something much darker. Let me explain. His name was Ryan, and we'd matched on Hinge. He was cute in that low-key, I don't try too hard way, messy hair, stubble, and a collection of photos that made him look rugged and outdoorsy. One picture was of him on a mountain summit, another of him kayaking, and another of him holding a cup of coffee with the caption, "Life's too short for bad coffee." He seemed like the kind of guy who spent his weekends camping or climbing rocks, and he had this laid-back vibe that I found really appealing. We chatted for a few days, and he suggested we meet for a walk in the park. "It's the perfect first date," he said. "Casual, chill, and no pressure." I agreed. It sounded refreshing. No stuffy restaurants, no awkward silences over overpriced cocktails. Just two people strolling and talking. We planned to meet at 4 p.m. on a Saturday at a popular park near downtown. I got there 5 minutes early, feeling optimistic. It was a gorgeous day, clear skies, warm sun, perfectly crisp air. I texted Ryan when I arrived, and he immediately replied, "Running a little late." "Be there soon." No big deal, I thought. People run late all the time. I sat on a bench near the park entrance and scrolled through my phone to pass the time. 10 minutes went by, then 20, then 30. At 4:40, I was about to give up and leave when I spotted him walking toward me, looking like he'd just run a marathon. His hair was disheveled, his shirt was wrinkled, and his face was flushed. He looked off, not in an "I'm just a little frazzled" way, but in a "something seriously wrong" way. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. "Sorry I'm late. It's been a crazy day." I forced a smile. "No worries. Everything okay?" Yeah, he said quickly, brushing it off. "Just stuff. Okay." As we started walking, I couldn't help but notice he was moving stiffly, like his whole body ached. And that's when I saw them, the bruises. They were everywhere. Dark purple and green splotches on his forearms, one peeking out from the neckline of his shirt, and another on his shin where his jeans had rolled up slightly. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice. Finally, I couldn't help myself. "Are you okay?" I asked, gesturing toward his arm. "That looks like it hurts." "Oh, this?" he said, glancing down at the massive bruise on his forearm. He laughed nervously. "It's nothing. Just a thing." I frowned. "A thing?" "Yeah, he said, waving it off. "I'm kind of clumsy." "Clumsy?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's a lot of bruises for someone who's just clumsy." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I do a lot of sports," he said finally, his tone defensive. "Climbing, sparring, that kind of stuff. It happens." "Sparring?" I asked, surprised. "Like boxing?" "Sort of," he said vaguely. "It's not a big deal." But it felt like a big deal. His whole demeanor had shifted. He went from being relaxed and chatty in our texts to guarded and jittery in person. And the more I tried to make sense of what he was saying, the less it added up. If he was into climbing or boxing, why hadn't he mentioned it before? And why was he acting so cagey about it now? We kept walking, but the vibe was completely off. Every time I tried to steer the conversation to something light, like movies or travel, he'd answer in short, clipped sentences and then change the subject. He seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. Every so often, he'd glance over his shoulder, like he was checking to see if someone was following us. At one point, I stopped walking and turned to face him. "Ryan, are you sure everything's okay? You seem off." "I'm fine," he said quickly, avoiding my gaze. "I'm just tired. Like I said, it's been a crazy day." "That's the second time you've said that," I pointed out. "What happened?" He hesitated, his eyes darting around like he was searching for an escape route. "It's nothing," he said finally. "Just some work stuff." "Work stuff?" I repeated. "You told me you're a freelance photographer. What kind of work stuff leaves you covered in bruises?" His face hardened. "Look, I really don't want to get into it, okay?" At that point, I was done. Between his defensiveness, his vague answers, and the fact that he'd been nearly an hour late, my patience was running on fumes. I wasn't about to spend the rest of the date playing 20 questions with someone who clearly didn't want to be honest with me. "Okay," I said, stepping back. "If you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But I don't think this is going anywhere." "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone suddenly softer. "I mean, I don't feel like I'm getting the full story," I said. "And if you're not willing to be open with me, I don't see the point in continuing this." He stared at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Fair enough." I turned and started walking back to my car, half expecting him to call after me, but he didn't. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching me leave. Maybe I will just get a takeaway next time and relax by myself. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, but I was cautiously optimistic about my date with Brian. We'd been texting for about 2 weeks, and he seemed like one of the rare breed of guys who knew how to hold a conversation without making it weird. He wasn't sending me one-word replies or asking for pictures at 2 a.m., so the bar was low, but hey, he cleared it. He worked in finance in Manhattan, Typical, I know, but he seemed refreshingly laid back for someone in that world. A little sarcastic, funny, confident. I figured, why not? At the very least, I'd get a good drink out of it. We decided to meet at the Ready Rooftop Bar in the East Village. It's one of those places with twinkly lights, great views of the Manhattan skyline, and cocktails that cost way too much, but make you feel like you're in a rom-com. It was a Thursday night, perfect for something casual, but still with a little buzz in the air. I'd spent the day convincing myself this could actually be fun. I mean, he seemed normal enough anyway, and I was determined to give him a chance. When I arrived, Brian was already waiting at the bar. He looked like his photos, which immediately put me at ease. He was tall, with an easy smile and that effortlessly put-together look that screamed, "I work in Midtown, but pretend I don't care about it." He waved me over, and I have to admit, I felt a little thrill of excitement. First impressions? Solid. The first hour of the date was actually great. No, seriously, it was. We ordered drinks, an old-fashioned for him, a spicy margarita for me, and settled into one of the outdoor tables. He was funny, charming even, and we had one of those natural back and forths that didn't feel forced. We talked about everything from our favorite movies to the horrors of New York City landlords. He told me about growing up in Chicago and how he still missed deep dish pizza, and I told him about my childhood in Boston and how I could never live without Dunkin'. It was easy, comfortable. I started thinking, wow, maybe this could actually go somewhere. And then things took a turn. "So," Brian said, leaning back in his chair with a sly grin, "I've got a question for you." I smiled, sipping my drink. "Okay, what's up? How do you feel about threesomes?" I froze mid-sip, almost choking on my margarita. "A what?" "Threesomes," he repeated, like this was the most casual thing in the world. "Are you into them?" I stared at him, not sure if I was being pranked. "I mean, no, not really my thing." Brian raised his eyebrows, looking genuinely surprised. "Really? Huh, I kind of assumed you'd be into it." I blinked, trying to process what he'd just said. "Why would you assume that?" He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "I don't know, you just seem open-minded. I figured you'd be down." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Well, I'm not," I said, my tone sharper now. "And honestly, it's kind of weird that you're bringing this up on a first date." That's when his whole demeanor shifted. The charm, the confidence, it all disappeared in an instant, replaced by something colder. "Wow, okay," he said, leaning forward. "No need to get all uptight about it. I just thought you were cooler than this." "Cooler? Cooler?" I stared at him, my stomach sinking. "Excuse me?" "I mean, come on," he said, his voice rising. "You're seriously telling me you've never even thought about it? Like, not even once?" Now I was getting angry. "No, Brian, I haven't. And even if I had, I sure as hell wouldn't discuss it on a first date." He rolled his eyes, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms like a sulking teenager. "Whatever. You're just like all the other prudes. I thought you were different." I couldn't believe what was happening. Just an hour ago, this man had been making me laugh about how terrible New York bagels are compared to Chicago pizza. And now he was sitting here, sulking like a child because I didn't want to entertain his threesome fantasy. I stared at him for a moment, debating whether to just leave or give him a piece of my mind. But then he muttered something under his breath, something about how women these days are so boring. And that was it. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and looked him dead in the eye. "You know what, Brian? I don't think I'm the boring one here." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I walked out of that bar, my heels clicking against the rooftop floor, and didn't look back. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed. A text from Brian. "Seriously? You're just gonna leave like that?" I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked his number and texted my best friend to let her know I'd survived yet another entry in the dating horror story anthology that was my life. She replied with, "What happened? Spill now," and I spent the cab ride home typing out the entire story in all caps. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine, kicked off my heels, and deleted Hinge. Again, maybe I'd re-download it in a week, or maybe I'd finally listen to my mom and try meeting people at Whole Foods instead. Either way, one thing was certain. I wasn't wasting another second on Brian and his Midtown finance bro nonsense. And to anyone else out there wondering if it's okay to ask someone about threesomes on a first date, let me save you the trouble. It's not. If you've ever been on a date that went from fun to absolute chaos in under 10 minutes, you'll understand why I still cringe when I think about my night with Sean. What started as a seemingly normal dinner date ended with me Googling symptoms, yelling for help and questioning all of my life choices. Let me explain from the start. Sean and I met on Bumble. We clicked right away. He was funny, easy to talk to, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a week of texting, he asked me out to dinner. "Do you like Thai food?" he asked. "Love it," I replied. "Great," he said. "There's this amazing place downtown we should try." I was excited. Thai food, a cute guy, and a chance to actually wear something other than sweatpants? Sign me up. The night of the date, I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early. Sean strolled in right on time, looking effortlessly handsome in a button-up shirt and jeans. He gave me a big smile and said, "You look great." So far, so good. We got a cozy table near the window, ordered some drinks, and started chatting. He was just as funny and charming in person as he'd been over text, and I was starting to think, wow, this might actually be a good one. When it came time to order, Sean suggested we share a few dishes. "Do you like spicy food?" he asked. "Absolutely," I said, feeling adventurous. We ended up ordering a mix of things: pad thai, green curry, and a plate of spicy shrimp with cashews. The food arrived quickly, and everything looked and smelled amazing. We dug in, and for the first 20 minutes, the date was perfect. We were laughing, sharing stories, and bonding over our mutual love of travel and bad puns. And then it happened. Sean had just taken a big bite of the spicy shrimp when I noticed him pause. His smile faded, and he started fidgeting in his seat. At first, I thought maybe he'd just eaten something too spicy, but then I saw it, the redness creeping up his neck. His face started to flush, and his breathing sounded off. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice rising with concern. Yeah," he said, waving me off. "I think it's just the spice. It's really spicy." But it wasn't just the spice. Within seconds, his eyes started to water, and he was scratching at his throat. That's when I realized something was seriously wrong. "Sean," I said, leaning forward, "are you having an allergic reaction?" "I don't know," he said, his voice strained. "Maybe. I feel kind of weird." Weird? That was not reassuring. My heart started to race as I watched him struggle to catch his breath. His lips were swelling, and his face was turning a concerning shade of red. I didn't even know what he was allergic to, or if he even knew, but it was clear that we were officially in emergency mode. "Do you have an EpiPen?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "No," he croaked. "I've never had this happen before." "Great. Just great." I stood up, frantically waving down the waiter. "Excuse me. I think he's having an allergic reaction. Can you call an ambulance?" The waiter's eyes widened, and he rushed off to get help. Meanwhile, Sean was clutching his throat and coughing, and I was sitting there, completely panicked, trying to figure out what to do. Should I pat his back? Get him water? What if I did the wrong thing and made it worse? "Just try to breathe," I said, which felt like the most useless advice ever, considering he was clearly struggling to do exactly that. A few minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, the restaurant manager came over with a first aid kit and asked if Sean had any known allergies. "I don't think so," he gasped. "Maybe shellfish?" "Shellfish? Why on earth would he order shrimp if he might be allergic to shellfish?" I didn't say that out loud, though, because it didn't seem like the right time for a lecture. The ambulance arrived shortly after, and the paramedics swooped in like superheroes. They gave Sean oxygen and an injection, epinephrine, I think, and within minutes, he started to look a little better. His breathing steadied, the redness faded, and he was able to speak again, though his voice was still shaky. "I'm so sorry," he said, glancing at me as the paramedics got him ready to transport to the hospital. "This is not how I wanted tonight to go." "It's okay," I said, though I was still trembling from the adrenaline rush. "Just focus on feeling better." They took Sean to the hospital for observation, and the restaurant comped our meal, though I was way too rattled to care. I sat in my car for a few minutes afterward, trying to process what had just happened. One minute, I was on a promising first date, and the next, I was watching my date nearly choke on a shrimp while I screamed for help in a crowded restaurant. It was a lot. Sean texted me later that night from the hospital. He apologized profusely, thanked me for staying calm, and said he'd learned his lesson about being more careful with food. I told him I was glad he was okay, and left it at that. I ended up ghosting him after that. I know, ghosting isn't cool. But honestly, I was too shaken up to even think about seeing him again. The whole experience had left me traumatized, and while I genuinely wished him well, I couldn't picture myself going on another date with him. Every time I thought about it, all I could see was his swollen face and hear his gasping breaths. It was just too much. I thought this date was going to be simple, normal, just an easy evening with a guy I'd been chatting with for a week. Tom and I matched on Hinge, and he seemed promising. He worked as a graphic designer out in Brooklyn, and I was living in a studio apartment in the East Village, so meeting somewhere central felt like a no-brainer. We agreed on dinner at L'Artusi in the West Village, a spot I'd been to once before and loved. The food was great, the vibe was cozy, and it wasn't too stuffy, perfect for a first date. I was cautiously optimistic. I wasn't ready to start planning a wedding or anything, but he seemed like a decent guy. Decent is rare these days. I spent a little extra time getting ready, curled my hair, picked out a black dress that was flirty but not trying too hard, and even traded my usual sneakers for a pair of low heels. For me, that's effort. I left early, because the last thing I wanted was to be one of those people rushing in all sweaty and apologizing for being late. Plus, L'Artusi fills up fast, even on a Thursday night, and I didn't want to risk losing our reservation. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted Tom standing outside. He was tall, a little lanky, wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. He looked like his photos, which was already a win. But then I noticed he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, holding an oversized Louis Vuitton purse, and looking like she was about to tell me all about her garden club, was an older woman. She had to be in her 50s, short, curly hair, floral blouse, sensible flats. My first thought was, oh, maybe that's his aunt or someone dropping something off. But she wasn't just passing by. She was standing next to him, smiling warmly, like she'd been waiting for me too. As I walked closer, I gave Tom a polite wave and glanced at the woman, still trying to make sense of the situation. And then, without a hint of awkwardness, Tom said, "Hey Emma, so glad you could make it. This is my mom, Carol." I swear to God, my brain short-circuited. His mom, on a first date? I stood there frozen for a second, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate joke. Maybe he was pranking me, or testing me. Surely no one in their right mind would bring their mother to a first date at a trendy West Village restaurant. Right? I forced a smile, because what else was I supposed to do? "Oh, hi," I said, glancing between them, my voice betraying how utterly confused I was. Carol beamed at me and reached out to shake my hand. "It's so nice to meet you. Tom's told me so much about you." I almost said, "Funny, he didn't mention you," but I bit my tongue. I was still hoping there was some kind of explanation for this. Maybe she was just here to say hi and then leave. Maybe she happened to be in the neighborhood and wanted to meet me for 5 minutes. Surely, she wasn't staying for the whole date. Spoiler, she was staying for the whole date. Tom held the door open, and the three of us walked inside. The hostess looked as confused as I felt when Tom said, "Table for 3. She led us to a corner table, and I sat down, still in disbelief that I was about to have dinner with my date's mom. As soon as we sat down, Carol launched into full interrogation mode. "So Emma, where are you from? What do you do? Do you like kids?" She didn't even glance at the menu. She was too busy grilling me like I was applying for a job as Tom's future wife. "I'm originally from Philly," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "But I've been in New York for a few years now. I'm a copywriter at an ad agency in Midtown." "Oh, a career woman," Carol said, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite disapproval, but wasn't exactly enthusiasm either. "That's interesting." "Interesting? What was that supposed to mean?" I laughed nervously and took a sip of water, already wishing it was wine. Tom, meanwhile, was just sitting there, smiling like this was the most normal thing in the world. He didn't step in to redirect the conversation or explain why his mom was here. He just let her keep going. "What agency do you work for?" Carol continued. "And how do you like it there? Do you think it's the kind of job you'll stick with long term, or are you thinking about something more flexible in the future?" I blinked at her, trying to process the not-so-subtle implication. I like it a lot. It's a great company." Carol nodded thoughtfully, like she was filing my answer away for later. "That's nice. But you'd be willing to put your career on hold for the right man, wouldn't you?" I almost choked on my water. "I'm pretty focused on my career right now," I said, laughing awkwardly. "But who knows what the future holds?" Carol frowned slightly, and I could feel her judging me. "Tom loves kids," she said, turning to him with a proud smile. "He's always wanted a big family. Haven't you, sweetheart?" Tom nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I've always thought 5 kids would be great. But, I'm flexible. 4 is fine too." 4? 5? Kids? I hadn't even ordered my pasta yet, and this man was out here planning our future like we were on an episode of The Bachelor. I glanced at Tom, hoping he'd realize how bizarre this all was, but he just kept smiling at me like he was waiting for me to agree. "Oh wow," I said, trying to sound polite but also firm. "That's ambitious." The waiter came over to take our drink orders, and I immediately ordered a glass of red wine. Tom ordered a beer, and Carol, because of course she did, ordered a Diet Coke. As soon as the waiter walked away, she turned her attention back to me. "So Emma," she said, leaning forward like she was about to ask me something deeply personal, "have you ever cheated in a relationship?" I froze, the question hitting me like a slap in the face. No," I said, completely taken aback. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, I just like to know these things," she said casually, as though this was a totally normal question to ask someone you'd just met. I glanced at Tom, waiting for him to step in and maybe, I don't know, defend me? But no, he just shrugged and said, "Mum's just looking out for me." Looking out for him? Was this some kind of weird family ritual? Did Carol come on all his first dates to vet potential girlfriends? I wanted to ask, but I didn't trust myself to say it without sounding completely unhinged. The rest of the night was a blur of invasive questions and awkward silences. Carol wanted to know everything: my salary, my cooking skills, my thoughts on marriage. At one point, she even asked if I'd ever been in therapy. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. By the time dessert rolled around, I was done. I made up an excuse about having an early morning meeting and asked for the check. Tom looked a little disappointed, but Carol? Carol looked smug, like she thought she'd successfully scared me off. Outside the restaurant, Tom tried to lean in for a kiss, but I dodged him with a polite smile. "This was lovely," I lied. "We should do it again sometime." Spoiler, we did not do it again. I blocked his number the second I got home. And Carol, wherever you are, I hope you're happy, because I am never dating your son again. This story reminded me of one of the weirdest and most unsettling experiences I've ever had while dating. At the time, I was firmly in my bad decisions era, when my standards were lower than my self-esteem, and I thought saying no thanks to anyone who showed interest in me was somehow rude. Spoiler, it's not. But back then, I didn't know better, and this particular experience taught me a lot about trusting my gut, and about dodging machetes. So I met this guy. He seemed normal enough at first, at least by my already questionable standards. He wasn't charming per se, but he had that kind of scrappy bad boy vibe that made me think, oh, he's probably misunderstood. Let me just pause right here and say, ladies, if you ever find yourself describing a man as misunderstood, run. Anyway, we'd gone out a few times and things were fine. Not great, not terrible, just fine. One night, he invited me over to his place, and for some reason, I said yes. Now, I should have known I was in for some nonsense the second I walked into his apartment. The first thing that hit me was the smell, this overwhelming mix of weed, stale takeout, and something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but could only describe as bad decisions. The second thing that hit me was his roommate, who he introduced as Cowboy. Now, Cowboy was at least 60 years old, had a wiry, unkempt beard, and looked like he'd stepped out of a low-budget western, where the main plot is that everyone's on drugs. Cowboy didn't say much at first. He just nodded at me, squinted like he was trying to figure out if he'd seen me before, and then went back to whatever he was doing, which, from what I could tell, was sitting on the couch sharpening a knife. I tried to act like this was totally normal because, again, bad decisions era. Meanwhile, the guy I was there to see, let's call him loser number 47 because that feels appropriate, was acting like none of this was weird. He offered me a drink, which I declined because I didn't trust anything that came out of that kitchen, and then he said, "Hey, let me show you something." Now, when a man says, "let me show you something," in a tone that's equal parts excitement and secrecy, it's never good. But did I leave? No. Did I politely decline? Also no. I sat there like a fool and said, sure. He grabbed this enormous cardboard box from the corner of the room and plopped it down on the coffee table in front of us. When he opened it, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The thing was packed, like bursting at the seams, with huge bags of weed. I don't mean a little stash for personal use. I mean distribution levels of weed. This was a DEA raid waiting to happen. As I sat there, trying to process what I was looking at, he started pulling out the bags and laying them across the table like he was showing off his prized collection. Then he looked at me and said, "All right, so here's how you sell it." Excuse me? He proceeded to give me a full tutorial on how to package, price, and distribute weed. I'm talking step-by-step instructions, complete with tips on maximizing profit margins and avoiding getting caught. It was like watching a very illegal episode of Shark Tank. Cowboy occasionally chimed in with his own expert advice, which mostly consisted of grunts and vague mutterings about the good old days. At one point, Cowboy actually got up, walked over to the window, and peered outside like he was on lookout, which did absolutely nothing to calm my nerves. I should have left right then and there. I should have stood up, said, "You know what, I just remembered I have to go wash my hair," and bolted. But no, I stayed, because apparently my survival instincts were taking a nap that day. Then came the knock at the door. It wasn't a polite knock either. It was loud and aggressive, the kind of knock that says, "I'm not here to sell you Girl Scout cookies." My heart stopped. Cowboy froze mid-grunt. Loser number 47, however, acted like this was totally normal. Without batting an eye, he got up, walked over to the wall, and grabbed a machete that was hanging there by a rope. Yes, a machete. Just casually hanging on the wall, like it was part of the decor. He opened the door with the machete in hand, blade first, like some kind of deranged pirate. I couldn't see who was on the other side, but I could hear them muttering, and it didn't sound friendly. They talked for a couple of minutes. Well, talked is a generous way to describe it. And then he shut the door, came back inside, and put the machete back on the wall like nothing had happened. At this point, I was ready to sprint out of there and never look back. I didn't even care if I left my purse behind. I was already mentally composing the 911 call I'd make once I got to safety. But before I could make my escape, loser number 47 turned to me and said, "Hey, you ever shoot a gun?" I just stared at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. "We should go out to the woods and shoot some shit," he said. "It's fun. You'll love it." Now, I don't know if it was the way he said it or the fact that Cowboy was still lurking in the corner sharpening his knife, but my brain immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. "Shoot some shit? You mean me?" I politely declined, muttering something about having an early day tomorrow, and stood up to leave. "Oh, come on," he said, flashing me a grin that I'm sure he thought was charming, but actually made me want to vomit. "You'll be safe with me." Safe. With the guy who just answered the door with a machete. I mumbled something about needing to get home, and practically ran out of there. I didn't even wait for him to walk me to my car. I just bolted, got in, locked the doors, and drove off like my life depended on it, which honestly it might have. The worst part? I didn't even break things off with him right away. I don't know if it was fear, stupidity, or some combination of both, but I kept seeing him for a little while longer. Every time I went over to his place, Cowboy was there, lurking in the background like some kind of chaotic spirit animal. Eventually, loser number 47 got arrested for, wait for it, drug possession with intent to distribute. Shocking, I know. I'd like to say I was surprised, but honestly, I was just relieved. At least now I had a solid excuse to never see him again. Looking back, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was the fact that I'd been single for too long. Maybe it was the fact that I went to an all-women's college, and my ability to judge men was severely underdeveloped. Whatever the reason, I learned a valuable lesson that day. If a guy has a machete hanging on his wall and a roommate named Cowboy, run. Don't make excuses. Don't stick around to see how things play out. Just run. To this day, I can't walk past a machete or smell weed without thinking about that night. It's a reminder of just how far I've come, and just how low my standards used to be. Here's hoping Cowboy is doing alright, wherever he is. And as for loser number 47, well, I'm sure he's in prison now, probably trying to teach someone else how to maximize profits. Good riddance. Okay, so when you live in New York, you know there are certain places you never go unless you're playing tour guide for out-of-town relatives. Times Square, the Empire State Building, and of course, the Statue of Liberty. But every now and then, someone comes along and manages to convince you that maybe, just maybe, it could be fun to be a tourist in your own city. That someone in this case was a guy named Chris. Chris and I matched on Hinge. At first, he seemed normal. Cute, even. He had that all-American clean-cut vibe, short brown hair, a nice smile, and a profile filled with photos of him at baseball games, holding beers, and hanging out with friends. His bio said he'd just moved to New York from Chicago and was looking forward to exploring the city with someone fun. I figured, okay, he's new to the city, which explains the touristy vibe. Maybe he just needs a cool local guide. And honestly, he was cute enough that I didn't mind being that guide. We started chatting, and Chris suggested meeting up for a classic NYC experience. I assumed he meant a rooftop bar, or maybe a walk through Central Park. Nope. He wanted to go to the Statue of Liberty. Now, I hadn't been to the Statue of Liberty since a middle school field trip, but I thought, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. Plus, I figured the date had potential. It was unique, and we'd have plenty of time to talk while taking in the views. The day of the date arrived, and I met Chris at Battery Park, where the ferry departs. Right away, things felt a little off. He showed up 20 minutes late and barely apologized, brushing it off with a casual, "Sorry, the subway was a nightmare." Okay, fair. The subway is a nightmare, but still, first impressions matter. Then, as we were walking to the ticket booth, he suddenly stopped and patted his pockets. "Oh crap," he said. "I think I left my wallet at home." "Seriously?" I asked, trying not to sound annoyed. "Yeah," he said, laughing like it was no big deal. "Guess I was in such a rush that I forgot it. Mind covering me?" Now, I'm not opposed to splitting or even paying for a date if the circumstances call for it, but the way he said it, so casual like it was just expected, rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I didn't want to make a scene, so I sighed and said, "Fine." I bought both our ferry tickets, and we boarded the boat. As we cruised toward the Statue of Liberty, I tried to salvage the date by making small talk. "So, what made you move to New York?" I asked. "Work," he said, shrugging. "But honestly, I don't get the hype about this city. It's so expensive, and everyone's in a rush all the time. Chicago's way better." I blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, well, what do you like about New York so far?" "Not much," he said with a laugh. "The pizza's decent, I guess. But the people? Not so much. Everyone here is so rude." I forced a smile, thinking, says the guy who just made me pay for his ticket. But I kept my mouth shut and tried to steer the conversation to something more positive. "So, have you explored much of the city yet?" "Not really," he said, leaning back against the railing. "I've been pretty busy. Plus, there's just so much walking here, you know? It's exhausting." At this point, I was starting to regret agreeing to this date. His negativity was draining, and I couldn't help but feel like I was dragging him along on an outing he'd suggested. But the real chaos struck when we got to the statue itself. As we made our way toward the entrance, Chris suddenly stopped and groaned. "Ugh, this line is insane. Do we really have to do this?" "Well, yeah," I said, gesturing to the line. "That's kind of how it works." "God, this is such a tourist trap," he muttered. "I don't get why people even care about this thing. It's just a big statue." I bit my tongue, trying to stay polite. "You're the one who wanted to come here," I reminded him. "Yeah, but I didn't think it'd be this much of a hassle," he said, crossing his arms. "I mean, how do you New Yorkers put up with this crap?" At that point, I was done. I'd already paid for his ticket, endured his endless complaints, and now he was acting like I'd dragged him here against his will. I took a deep breath and said, "Look, if you don't want to be here, we can leave. But maybe next time, don't suggest something you're not actually interested in." He looked at me surprised. "Whoa, no need to get snippy. I just think this whole thing is overrated." "Right?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because complaining about everything is such a great way to spend a date." He rolled his eyes. "You're kind of intense, you know that?" That was it. That was the moment I realized there was no saving this disaster of a date. Without another word, I turned and walked back toward the ferry. I didn't care if I had to wait in line or sit through another boat ride. I just needed to get away from him. Chris followed me, still trying to defend himself. "Come on, don't be like that. I was just being honest." "Yeah, well, maybe work on your timing," I shot back. "And maybe bring your wallet next time." By the time we got back to Battery Park, I was practically sprinting toward the subway. Chris called after me saying, "So I'll text you later?" I didn't even turn around. I just waved vaguely over my shoulder and disappeared into the station. Needless to say, I never heard from him again, and thank God for that. So a friend of mine, one of those friends who you think has good intentions but actually might just secretly hate you, decides to set me up on a blind date. "Oh, you'll love him," she says. "He's my nephew. He's a great guy, super chill." Now, I should have known better. The words blind date alone should have sent me running for the hills. But for some reason, I figured, what's the worst that could happen? Let me just say, I was a fool. A naive, trusting fool. It all started with a phone call. He calls me, which, okay, fine, that's normal. But the reason for the call, that's where things start to go south. "Hey, so my car got stolen," he says, as casually as if he were telling me the weather forecast. "You're gonna have to pick me up." Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm meeting someone for the very first time, I may be trying to make a good impression. Not start things off by making them my unpaid Uber driver. But against my better judgment, I agree to pick him up. I tell myself, cars get stolen. It's not his fault. Maybe he's having a rough time. Spoiler alert, this was the beginning of me making way too many excuses for this guy. So I drive over to his place, and when he comes out, I'm not exactly blown away. He's wearing a wrinkled button-down that looks like it came out of someone's laundry pile, and jeans that might have been alive longer than I have. But hey, I'm not shallow. I'm here for the conversation, right? I ask him where he wants to go, and he suggests this fancy seafood place 2 towns over. 2 towns over, mind you. Not the cute little diner down the street, not the casual burger joint around the corner. No, we're talking a full-on seafood extravaganza, the kind of place where lobster is listed as market price, and you have to take out a small loan just to order an appetizer. But whatever, I'm trying to be optimistic. On the way there, I realize I need to stop for gas. I pull into a station, hop out, and start pumping. When I get back into the car, something feels off. I go to turn on the radio, and that's when I notice all of my presets. Every single one has been changed. I just kind of sit there for a second, staring at the screen, trying to process what I'm seeing. "Oh yeah," he says, laughing. "Your music taste is a little funny, huh? So I changed them for you." He changed my radio presets without asking, without even mentioning it, like I'm some kind of musical charity case in need of his intervention. At this point, I should have turned the car around and dropped him off back at his place, but no. I decided to soldier on, because apparently I have the self-respect of a wet paper towel. We finally get to the restaurant, and things somehow manage to get worse. As soon as we sit down, he pulls out his phone and starts scrolling. Not a quick glance, not a "let me check this really fast, sorry about that." No, this man is full-on absorbed in whatever nonsense is happening on his screen. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, staring at the menu, wondering if it's possible to eat my weight in shrimp cocktail just to get through the night. When the waiter comes over, he doesn't even look at the menu. "I'll have the double lobster special," he says, like he's a Rockefeller and not someone whose car allegedly got stolen. I order something small, mostly because I'm too annoyed to enjoy food, and I figure I'll grab something on the way home after I drop this clown off. If only I'd known how much worse things were about to get. At some point during the meal, he gets a phone call, and instead of ignoring it, like any decent human being would do while on a date, he answers it. I'm sitting there, dumbfounded, while he chats away like I'm not even there. And then, just when I think it can't get any worse, he says this. "Yeah, she's alright. I'd give her about a 6 out of 10. Haven't seen her from behind real good yet, though." I don't know if I've ever been so close to committing a crime. I wanted to flip the table, throw my drink in his face, and walk out, but instead, I just sat there frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Was this real life? Was I being punked? Where were the cameras? The bill comes, and I'm already planning my escape when he hits me with, "Oh man, I forgot my wallet." Of course he did. Of course. Because why wouldn't he? At this point, I'm so angry, I can barely see straight. I pay the bill, because what else am I supposed to do? And sign the credit card slip with a hand that's visibly shaking. I'm not sure if it's from rage or humiliation, or some unholy combination of the two. On the drive back, I'm dead silent. I don't trust myself to speak, because I know that if I open my mouth, it's all going to come pouring out, and I'll say something that'll make the situation even worse. He, on the other hand, is completely unfazed. In fact, he has the audacity to ask me to drop him off at a bar instead of his house. "It'll be fun," he says, like we're best friends about to go on some grand adventure. I drop him off at the bar, but before he goes inside, he turns to me and says, "You should come in. It'll be a good time." I decline, obviously, but instead of taking the hint, he leans in and says, "Come on, there's this skank in there who just broke up with me, and I need to make out with someone in front of her so she'll get jealous." I don't even have words at this point. I just stare at him, blinking, like he's speaking a language I don't understand. Eventually, he sighs, mutters something under his breath, and goes inside. I wait just long enough to make sure he's not coming back out, and then I floor it out of there like my life depends on it. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but no. A few months later, I get a friend request from him on Facebook. I stared at the notification for a good 5 minutes, debating whether to ignore it or accept it just so I could tell him off. In the end, I did neither. Instead, I deactivated my entire Facebook account. I figured it was easier to quit social media altogether than to risk any further interaction with this guy. So yeah, that's my worst date. The kind of experience that makes you question every decision you've ever made and every person who's ever told you, "Oh, you'll love him." To my friend who set this up, I'm still not sure if you were trying to sabotage my life or if you genuinely thought this would work out. But either way, I forgive you. Just never do this to me again. There are moments in life when the unexpected happens, when seemingly simple choices lead to nights you'll never forget, for better or worse. This is one of those stories, and it all began outside a small shop, just an ordinary day that turned into something far stranger. I was standing outside the shop, taking a smoke break, casually chatting with a few people who had gathered there. It was one of those moments where none of us knew each other, but fell into easy conversation, the kind where laughter and shared jokes make you feel like old friends, even if it's just for 10 minutes. That's when I noticed her. She was gorgeous. Her laughter was infectious. Her eyes had a spark, a kind of playful curiosity, and she had this confident way of speaking that made you feel like she was completely at ease. I couldn't help but watch her as we all stood around talking. She was holding a cigarette in one hand, gesturing animatedly with the other, and every now and then, she'd glance at me in that way that makes you wonder if she knows you're looking. At some point, the group began to thin out. People headed off to wherever they needed to be, and soon it was just me, her, and a lingering conversation that felt like it could keep going forever. We started talking one-on-one, and it turned out we had a lot in common. She had a sharp wit and a way of talking that made me want to keep the conversation going. So before we parted ways, I worked up the courage to ask for her number. To my surprise and relief, she gave it to me. Over the next week or so, we texted back and forth. Just casual banter that starts to build familiarity. I decided to take a chance and asked if she'd like to go out sometime. She agreed, but her answer came with a caveat. Her work schedule was chaotic, and she wasn't sure when she'd have free time. I told her no problem, we'd figure it out. Life gets busy, I get it. That same evening, after we'd been texting for a while, I ended up falling asleep earlier than usual. It had been a long day, and I was out cold. When I woke up, it was to the sound of my phone buzzing loudly on the nightstand. Groggy and confused, I glanced at the screen. It was her calling me. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming, but when I answered, I heard her voice on the other end, soft but slightly slurred. She'd been drinking. "Hey," she said, her tone playful. "You should come over." I checked the time. It was past 11 p.m. My first thought was, who asks someone to come over this late, unless they want something? I debated it for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I threw on some clothes, grabbed a pair of athletic shorts to sleep in just in case, and headed out the door. Her place was about 15 minutes away, and when I arrived, she greeted me at the door with a big smile, a little unsteady on her feet. "Come on in," she said, and I could hear music playing faintly in the background. Her roommate, another girl, was there too, and the two of them had clearly been drinking for most of the evening. The living room was littered with empty bottles and half-empty glasses, and there was a sort of chaotic energy to the place, the kind of vibe you expect when people have been letting loose for hours. I joined them, and for the next hour or so we all drank and talked. Her roommate was nice, but eventually, she excused herself and went back to her room, leaving just the two of us. We stayed in the living room a little longer, but I could tell she was starting to get tired. Her movements were slower, her eyelids heavy. After a while, she stood up, stretched, and said, "I'm gonna get ready for bed." That's when things took an unexpected turn. She walked over to her closet, opened it, and started pulling out some pajamas. Then, without hesitation or a second thought, she just stripped down, completely nude, right there in front of me. It wasn't like she was trying to be seductive or anything. It was so casual, like it didn't even occur to her that this might be a big deal to someone she'd only known for a week. I sat there, trying not to stare but also unable to look away, wondering what exactly I'd gotten myself into. She slipped into her pajamas and turned to me with a sleepy smile. "You can crash here if you want," she said, gesturing toward her bed. I nodded, grabbed the shorts I'd brought, and changed quickly while she wasn't looking. We climbed into bed, and for a moment, I thought maybe this was heading in the direction I'd assumed earlier. I tried to make a move, nothing too aggressive, just testing the waters, but she stopped me gently. "I just really want to sleep," she said, her voice soft and a little apologetic. I was confused, but I didn't push it. If sleep was all she wanted, then fine. Honestly, there's something kind of nice about just lying next to someone, sharing that quiet intimacy without any expectations. So I settled in, and we both tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. She tossed and turned for hours, shifting restlessly beside me. Every time I started to drift off, she'd move again, waking me up. After a while, I sat up and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded but didn't say much. Instead, she sat up too, rubbing her head as if trying to shake off a headache. I thought maybe the alcohol was catching up to her, so I reached out and rubbed her back, trying to soothe her. Then, without warning, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and crawled onto the floor. What happened next felt like something out of a horror movie. She got onto her hands and knees and crawled to the middle of the room, where she sat back on her heels and started rocking back and forth. I watched, half concerned and half terrified, unsure of what to do. It was like she was in some kind of trance. Then, out of nowhere, she grabbed something off the floor, some random piece of clothing, and stuffed it between her legs. She stayed like that for another minute or two, completely still, before finally crawling back into bed as if nothing had happened. After that, she stopped tossing and turning. She fell asleep almost immediately, and the room was finally quiet. I lay awake for a long time, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Part of me wanted to wake her up and ask if she was okay, but I didn't. Instead, I eventually drifted off, the strange events of the night replaying in my mind. The next morning, we both woke up groggy but otherwise fine. As we got out of bed, I noticed something strange. My pants, which I'd left on the floor, were completely soaked. At first, I thought maybe one of the drinks from the night before had spilled on them, but then the memory of what had happened during the night came rushing back. That's when it hit me. She had used my pants during her strange midnight episode. She had peed on them. She must have noticed too because she glanced at the pants, then at me, her expression unreadable. I had no idea if she remembered what had happened or if she was just as confused as I was. Not wanting to embarrass her, or myself, I laughed it off, blaming it on one of the drinks we'd left sitting around. Her roommate joined in on the laughter, and we all joked about how wild the night had been. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. After breakfast, I said my goodbyes and left. As I walked home, I replayed the events of the night over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it all. What had I gotten myself into? Did she remember what had happened? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I went on a date with a guy I'd met online, and to be honest, I thought it was shaping up to be a pretty good one for a change. His name was Adam. He was nice, humorous, engaging, and just awkward enough to be endearing. From our chats leading up to the date, I knew he was really into Christ. Religion's not really my thing. I hover somewhere between atheist and agnostic, but he was respectful about it and didn't push anything, so I figured why not. It's rare enough to find someone who doesn't open with a weird pickup line or ghost you after 3 messages. I decided to give it a shot. We met at this little Italian place downtown for dinner. He showed up looking sharp, wearing a button-up shirt and clean jeans, and he complimented my long black skirt almost immediately. I remember thinking he was sweet, even if a little overly polite, lots of ma'ams and thank yous that felt like he was trying a bit too hard. But I appreciated the effort. The conversation flowed easily, and I was starting to think this guy might actually have potential. After dinner, he suggested we go to the lake to watch the sunset. It sounded romantic, and I was wearing comfortable enough shoes to make it work. Well, at least for a while. By the time we got there, I realized the walk down to the lake involved a bit of uneven terrain, so I took off my heels and carried them in one hand while we made our way down the dam. As we got closer to the water, the scenery was breathtaking. The lake was calm, the sky was streaked with oranges and pinks, and the air had that cool, crisp feeling that made it seem like everything was falling into place. Adam was smiling, clearly happy that I'd agreed to come here, and we found a log that was arched just enough to make a perfect little bench. It felt like the kind of scene you'd see in a rom-com, idyllic, peaceful, picturesque. Then, of course, I stepped on a broken glass bottle. At first, I didn't even realize what had happened. There was a sharp sting, and when I looked down, I saw a jagged piece of glass sticking out of the bottom of my foot. I didn't want to freak Adam out. He seemed like the kind of guy who might panic at the sight of blood. So I calmly reached down, pulled the shard out, and told him, "Oh, I think I cut myself." He looked concerned but not overly alarmed, probably because my long skirt hid how bad it actually was. "Do you want to go back?" he asked, his voice soft and genuinely caring. I shook my head. "No, it's fine. We're already here. Let's just watch the sunset." In hindsight, this was a terrible decision, but in the moment, I really didn't want to ruin the vibe of the evening. He'd gone out of his way to plan this, and I didn't want to seem overly dramatic. I have a pretty ridiculous pain tolerance, so I figured I could tough it out for a little while. We sat there for about 15 minutes, talking and laughing while the sun dipped below the horizon. I was doing my best to ignore the growing wetness in my shoe and the slight throbbing in my foot. Adam was telling me a story about his brothers and some childhood prank that had gone wrong, and I remember laughing so hard that I almost forgot about the pain. But when we stood up to leave, everything changed. The moment I took a step, I realized I was leaving a trail of bloody footprints behind me. I glanced back at the log where we'd been sitting and saw a dark, sticky stain that looked like something out of a crime scene. It hit me then just how much I'd been bleeding. Adam noticed too. His face went pale as he stared at the trail I was leaving in the dirt. "Oh my God," he said, his voice tight. "Are you okay?" I waved him off, trying to stay calm. "It's fine," I said, even though it clearly wasn't. "Let's just get back to the car." I don't know how I managed it, but I walked back up the dam barefoot, leaving a trail of bloody footprints the entire way. Adam kept glancing at me like he wasn't sure if he should offer to carry me or just run for help. By the time we got to the car, I could tell he was starting to panic. "Do you want me to take you to the hospital?" he asked, his voice shaky. I shook my head. "No, it's fine. Just drive me back to my house. My roommate can take me." But Adam wasn't having it. "I'm not letting you wait around for your roommate. I'll take you to the ER myself." At this point, I was in too much pain to argue, so I slid into the passenger seat and let him drive. When we got to the ER, the waiting room was packed. The nurse at the front desk handed me a vomit basin and told me to keep my foot elevated while they prepped a room for me. Adam and I sat there for over an hour, passing the time by swapping stories about childhood injuries. I told him about the time I'd tried to jump off the roof with a bedsheet as a makeshift parachute and ended up with a broken arm. He told me about the time his brother hit him in the face with a baseball bat during an ill-advised game of backyard cricket. It was surprisingly fun, despite the circumstances, and for a moment, I thought maybe this date wasn't a complete disaster after all. When they finally called me back, Adam insisted on coming with me. I could tell he was trying to be supportive, even though he looked like he might pass out at any moment. The doctor numbed up my foot and started flushing the wound with saline. I couldn't feel a thing, which I found fascinating. In my infinite wisdom, I decided to make a joke out of it. "Hey look," I said, wiggling my foot so the gaping wound moved like a puppet. Rawr. This was a terrible idea. As I moved my foot, blood started gushing out of the wound again, and Adam's face went from pale to ghostly white in an instant. He swayed on his feet, muttered something about being fine, and then promptly collapsed onto the floor. The nurse rushed over to help him while I sat there, torn between laughing and feeling terrible. Apparently, Adam had neglected to mention that he was hemophobic. He had a serious fear of blood, and my little joke had pushed him way past his limit. By the time he came to, I was stitched up and ready to go. He looked embarrassed, muttering apologies as we walked back to the car. I told him not to worry about it, but I could tell the entire experience had shaken him. He dropped me off at my house, said a quick goodnight, and drove away. I never heard from him again. I've had some strange and uncomfortable experiences with dating apps, but this one takes the cake. It started out fairly normal, just two people chatting, enjoying some good vibes, and planning to meet up. But by the end of it, I found myself checking over my shoulder every time I left my house. Looking back, I wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. I matched with a woman named Sophie on Bumble. Sophie came across as someone who wasn't just looking for a hookup, which I appreciated, had too many of these types in the past which I did not want again. I wasn't necessarily trying to find my soulmate, but I also wasn't interested in something purely casual at the time. We started chatting, and Sophie was great to talk to, and after a couple of days of texting, she suggested meeting up for coffee at Starbucks. I was in. We met at a cute little cafe not too far from where I lived. Sophie looked just like her pictures, and she had this bubbly energy that immediately put me at ease. We talked about our favorite books, our dream travel destinations, and our mutual disdain for pineapple on pizza. She was charming and easy to talk to, and I left the date thinking it had gone really well. Over the next week, we kept texting, and Sophie seemed even more interested in me than I'd expected. She'd send me long, excited messages about her day, ask about mine, and suggest new places we could go together. At first, I was flattered. It's nice to feel wanted, and Sophie really seemed to be into me. But then it started to feel a little overwhelming. She'd text me constantly, morning, afternoon, night. If I didn't respond within an hour, she'd send follow-up messages. Hey, are you okay? Or did I say something wrong? I tried to brush it off as enthusiasm, but it was starting to feel like she was expecting way more of my time and attention than I could reasonably give. The second date came around, and we met up for a walk in the park. It was pleasant enough, but Sophie kept dropping little comments that felt oddly intense for someone I'd only just started seeing. She'd say things like, I feel like I can really be myself around you, or I think we have something really special. I smiled and nodded along, but in the back of my head, I was thinking, we've only been on 2 dates. How can you feel that way already? After that, things escalated quickly. She started showing up at places where I happened to be, my favorite coffee shop, the gym, even the grocery store. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but then it happened again, and again. One day, I was at the gym when I noticed Sophie on the treadmill a few rows away. She wasn't wearing workout clothes, she was just walking casually, staring at her phone. I waved, trying to keep things light, and she came over immediately. Hey, fancy seeing you here, she said, grinning. Yeah, hey, I said, glancing at the weights in my hands. You work out here too? Not really, she said, shrugging. I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by. It felt weird, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded and went back to my workout. But after that, it seemed like Sophie was always in the neighborhood. The breaking point came when I was at a friend's party. It was a small gathering, just a handful of people hanging out and playing board games. I hadn't told Sophie about it, so I was completely shocked when she walked through the door halfway through the night. Hey, she said, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. My friends exchanged confused glances as I pulled Sophie aside. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice low. Oh, I saw your Instagram story, she said casually. I figured I'd come by and say hi. I hadn't even thought to check who'd viewed my story, but apparently, Sophie had been keeping close tabs on me. This is a private party, I said, trying to keep my cool. You can't just show up uninvited. She looked hurt. I thought you'd be happy to see me. I didn't invite you, I said firmly. You need to leave. She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked out without another word. I spent the rest of the night trying to explain to my friends what had just happened. After that, I stopped responding to Sophie's messages. I thought she'd get the hint and move on, but instead she doubled down. She started leaving voicemails, some of them angry, others tearful. She'd say things like, I don't understand why you're ignoring me. I thought we had something real. And you're not even giving me a chance to explain myself. One night, I came home to find a handwritten note taped to my door. It said, I'm sorry if I scared you. I just want to talk. Please call me. That was the last straw. I blocked her number, deleted her from every social media platform, and made sure my Instagram stories were set to private. For weeks, I felt like I was looking over my shoulder every time I left the house. I never saw Sophie again, but the whole experience left me shaken. You want a horror story? Forget haunted houses, forget ghosts, forget whatever creepy supernatural nonsense you're picturing right now. Let me tell you about the real horror, willingly destroying your life for someone who doesn't deserve a single shred of it. Buckle up, because this isn't just a story, it's a cautionary tale, a how-to guide for ruining your own damn existence. So there I was, swiping my way through another mediocre Tuesday night on Bumble, fully prepared for the usual lineup of guys holding fish or posing with their cars. And then I matched with him. Dylan, because even now, just thinking about his real name makes me want to punch a wall and puke. Dylan was charming right off the bat, damn it. His messages were funny without trying too hard, and he actually asked me questions about myself instead of launching into some generic, so what brings you here? Nonsense. He was in my city for the weekend on a work trip, and we hit it off so well over text that we decided to meet up that night. I know what you're thinking. Red flag. He's only in town for the weekend. And yeah, you'd be right. But at the time I thought, why not? It's just 2 nights. No strings, no expectations. The first night was great. He was as funny and engaging in person as he was over text. We went out for drinks, talked until the bar closed, and then, well, let's just say it was a fun night. The second night was even better. We hit up a comedy show, grabbed late-night tacos, and by the end of it, I was low-key bummed that he'd be flying out the next day. When he left, we kept texting. It wasn't just a casual, had a great time wrap-up. It was full-on all-day texting. Morning, afternoon, night, he was everywhere. And honestly, it felt nice. I'd been in a bit of a dating slump, and here was this guy who seemed to genuinely enjoy talking to me. So when he said he wanted to come back and visit, I didn't immediately shut it down. To be fair, my first reaction was, hold up, slow your roll, dude. We hung out for 2 nights. Let's not act like we're star-crossed lovers. But then I thought, fuck it. What's the worst that can happen? Spoiler alert, a lot. So Dylan visits, and it's great. I mean, really great. We're talking this might actually be something great. Cue the long-distance relationship. At first, it was cute. Weekend visits, late-night FaceTimes, the works. I was fully in it, thinking, wow, maybe this is what love is supposed to feel like. Fast forward 7 months. 7 months of flights, phone calls, and planning our future together. And then, like an absolute idiot, I decide to move to his city. Let me say that again for the people in the back. I moved to his city. Packed up my life, said goodbye to my friends, left my job, and moved for a guy I'd known for less than a year. Why? Because I was in love. Or at least, I thought I was. At first, it was exciting. New city, new apartment, new chapter of my life. But it didn't take long for reality to set in. Dylan, as it turned out, was not the guy I thought he was. For one, he was selfish. Not just regular selfish, like forgetting to ask how your day was, but next-level selfish. Everything revolved around him, his schedule, his needs, his feelings. If I needed something, well, that was just too bad. He'd plan entire weekends without asking if I was free. He'd bail on me at the last minute because something more important came up, and he'd act like I was being unreasonable if I got upset. And don't even get me started on the emotional labor. I was basically his unpaid therapist, constantly reassuring him, supporting him, and making sure he felt good about himself, while getting absolutely nothing in return. But the worst part? I loved him. God help me, I loved him. I kept telling myself, he'll change. He just needs time. Relationships take work. So I stayed. And then one day, I couldn't do it anymore. It hit me like a freight train. This wasn't love. This was me bending over backward for someone who didn't give a damn about me. So I broke up with him. For about 5 minutes. Because of course Dylan came crawling back, saying all the right things, making all the right promises, and like the idiot I am, I believed him. We got back together, and for a while it was okay. Not great, not even good, but okay. Then surprise, surprise, the same shit started happening again. He didn't change, because why would he? He'd gotten what he wanted. Meanwhile, I was slowly unraveling, realizing that I'd turned my entire life upside down for a guy who couldn't even be bothered to meet me halfway. Eventually, I decided enough was enough. For real this time. I broke things off, packed my bags, and moved back home. I thought I'd feel relieved, like I was finally free. But instead, I just felt empty. Now here I am, back in my city, miserable and alone. My friends have moved on, my old job is gone, and I'm stuck trying to rebuild my life from scratch. All because I fell for the wrong guy. So yeah, if you're looking for a horror story, this is it. No ghosts, no demons, no murderers lurking in the shadows. Just me sitting in my crappy apartment, wondering how the hell I let this happen. Dating in the modern world is a series of adventures, mishaps, and awkward moments, all wrapped in the hope of finding someone who makes the chaos worthwhile. Tinder, in particular, has a way of turning your expectations on their head. One minute you're swiping and chatting, imagining the fun you'll have, and the next, life throws you a curveball you didn't see coming. That's exactly what happened to me when I met this guy. Let's call him Tinder Guy. Not the most creative nickname, but it suits the story. We hit it off immediately after matching. He was funny, charming, and had this easygoing vibe that made him stand out from the usual Tinder crowd. Our first 2 dates were genuinely a lot of fun. I hadn't really been looking for anything serious, but with him, it felt like there was potential. We laughed a lot, had great conversations, and I felt comfortable around him, which isn't always the case on Tinder dates. By the time our 3rd date rolled around, I was pretty into him. Like really into him. I decided I wanted to take things to the next level. He planned the 3rd date, and it was perfect. He took me to this cute little Italian restaurant that had candles on the tables and dim lighting. The whole romantic setup. We shared a bottle of wine, split a tiramisu for dessert, and everything just felt right. I knew by the time we were halfway through the main course that I wanted to sleep with him that night. And honestly, I thought he might feel the same way. After dinner, he invited me back to his place for another glass of wine, and I didn't hesitate for a second. His apartment was nice, clean, cozy, and full of little personal touches that made it feel like more than just a bachelor pad. He poured us each a glass of red wine, and we settled onto his couch. The conversation flowed as easily as it had all night, and before long we were kissing. At first, it was great. He was a good kisser, and it felt natural, not forced or awkward. But then, the kissing just kept going, fully clothed, making out on the couch, for what felt like an eternity. I'm not exaggerating when I say it lasted forever. At first, I was into it, but after a while, I started to wonder what was going on. We weren't teenagers at a high school party. We were two adults who had just come back from a romantic dinner. I was ready to move things forward, but he didn't seem to be getting the hint. After what felt like hours, but was probably more like 30 minutes, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If he wasn't going to make a move, I was. So I stood up, took a deep breath, and took off all of my clothes. Not in a dramatic way, but in a clear, okay, let's do this kind of way. I figured it would be enough to break the tension and let him know I was ready. Instead of reacting the way I expected, he sat up straight, still fully clothed, and looked at me with this serious, almost apologetic expression. I'll never forget what he said next. I can't have sex with you. I have an STD. Those words hit me like a ton of bricks. For a second, I didn't know how to respond. I was standing there completely naked, and he was just sitting there fully dressed, dropping this bombshell like it was nothing. It was, without a doubt, one of the most awkward moments of my life. I don't even remember what I said at first. Probably something like, "Oh, okay," because what else can you say in a situation like that? I sat back down on the couch and quickly started putting my clothes back on, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. My mind was racing. Part of me was mortified, but another part of me was grateful. I mean, he could have not told me. He could have gone through with it and let me find out later, which would have been a million times worse. The fact that he was upfront about it was, in hindsight, a good thing. But in the moment, it was just incredibly, painfully awkward. I tried to be nice about it. I really did. I told him I appreciated his honesty and that I wasn't upset, but it was clear that the night was over. The vibe had gone from romantic and exciting to uncomfortable and strange in a matter of seconds. I grabbed my bag, gave him a polite goodbye, and left his apartment as quickly as I could without making it seem like I was running away. The whole drive home, I replayed the night in my head, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. I mean, I couldn't exactly blame him. It wasn't his fault he had an STD, and I respected him for being honest about it. But I also couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. I'd been so excited for that night, and it had ended in the most awkward way imaginable. When I got home, I texted a couple of my friends to tell them what had happened, and their responses were a mix of shock, laughter, and relief. One of them said, "Well, at least he told you. That's more than a lot of guys would do." And she was right. As awkward as it had been, I was grateful that he'd been upfront with me. It could have gone a lot worse. Let me tell you about the worst decision of my life. No, scratch that. Let me tell you about how I managed to turn one bad decision into a series of bad decisions so colossal they could probably be studied in a psychology class. If you want a guide on how to ruin your summer, your self-esteem, and your sanity in one fell swoop, buckle up, because this is it. It all started on Tinder. Well, of course it did, because where else do you go when you're bored and lonely and apparently have no capacity for long-term thinking? I matched with this girl called Taylor. She was gorgeous, funny, pretty, and had a wild, chaotic energy that I found irresistible for reasons I still don't fully understand. We started chatting, and within a day or two, I invited her over. Just to hang out. Hang out. I mean, we had absolutely incredible sex. Like top tier, can't stop thinking about it sex. It was so good that even though I knew she was moving to Montana in a few weeks for some random cook position in a national park, I didn't care. I was already in way too deep. The next night, same thing. She came over, we hooked up, and it was just as amazing as the first time. By the time she left, I was already dreading the fact that she was leaving soon. But instead of taking the sane, logical route of just enjoying it for what it was and moving on, I decided to do something monumentally stupid. Taylor invited me to come out to Montana. She made it sound like some kind of magical adult summer camp, working in a kitchen, spending your free time hiking and drinking with co-workers, all while surrounded by the stunning beauty of a national park. I'd always wanted an excuse to drop everything and run off somewhere new. And apparently, I decided that following a girl I'd met twice was the perfect opportunity. I looked into the job, applied, and got it. And because I have the decision-making skills of a drunk toddler, I agreed to start dating Taylor. We'd known each other for, a month at this point? 2 hookups and some texting? But sure, let's call it a relationship. What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert, everything. When I got to Montana, things went south almost immediately. Taylor started acting weird, distant, like she hadn't expected me to actually show up. And then on our very first night together, she hit me with the bombshell. She had cancer. Let me repeat that for the people in the back. She had cancer. I didn't know what to say. I mean, what the hell do you say to that? She told me she didn't want to be in a relationship because of it, that she needed to focus on herself, and blah blah blah. I was still reeling, trying to process everything, when she flipped the script the very next day and said, "Never mind, let's stay together." At this point, any rational person would have realized that this was a terrible idea. But not me. No, I decided to roll with it because I'd already uprooted my entire life to be here, and I wasn't about to admit that I'd made a colossal mistake. The next night, she broke up with me again. This time I was done. I told her it was over, for real, and that we should just go our separate ways. I thought that would be the end of it, that we'd just coexist as co-workers and maybe even salvage some kind of friendship. But Taylor had other plans. Instead of letting me move on, she made it her personal mission to cock-block me at every turn. Anytime I so much as glanced at another girl, there she was, swooping in to make sure I didn't get anywhere. She'd spread rumors, make snide comments, and generally act like a jealous ex, even though she was the one who had broken up with me. And the screaming matches? Oh, the screaming matches. Imagine 2 people trying to work in a small, hot kitchen while barely speaking to each other, except when they're yelling over the sound of frying pans and blenders. That was my life for the entire summer. The worst part? I couldn't escape. We lived and worked in the same damn place, surrounded by mountains and trees and absolutely nowhere to hide. It was like being stuck in the world's most dysfunctional reality show, except there were no cameras and no prize money at the end. By the time the summer ended, I was a shell of my former self. I'd spent months trapped in this toxic mess of a situation, and for what? A girl I barely knew, a job that wasn't worth the stress, and a bunch of co-workers who probably thought I was insane. So yeah, if you're ever thinking about following someone you just met to another state, don't. Just don't. Because if my story proves anything, it's that poor choices have a way of compounding into absolute disasters. And Taylor? I have no idea what she's doing now, and frankly, I don't care. I'm too busy trying to rebuild my life and figure out how the hell I let things get so bad in the first place. This story will make you cringe, groan, and maybe even hate me a little bit. I'm not here to sugarcoat it or make excuses. I'm just here to tell you the truth. So, if you've ever wondered what it's like to accidentally match with someone who's wildly different from their online persona, welcome to my nightmare. I accidentally swiped on Tinder on this girl's profile, and she accepted. I matched with her. She messaged me first, which was a nice change of pace. Her name was Rachel. Rachel dove right in, super into me from the jump. Compliments, flirty vibes, the works. She didn't waste time either, boldly suggesting we should hook up. Now, I'm not one to shy away from a little forwardness. Confidence is attractive, right? And while Rachel wasn't exactly the best-looking girl on the app, her pictures had this cute in a quirky way vibe. I thought, why not? I was free the next night, so I figured we could get together and see where things went. And here's where the train started to derail, and quickly. I showed up at her place, and the moment I saw her, I knew I'd made a mistake. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but this wasn't the girl from the pictures. This wasn't even close to the girl from the pictures. I don't know if she'd used some high-tech filters, old photos, or just the magic of extreme angles. But the person standing in front of me was not the person I thought I'd agreed to meet. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was instantly disappointed. And I know how bad that sounds. Trust me, I've replayed this whole situation in my head enough times to know I didn't handle it perfectly. But in that moment, all I could think was, how do I get out of this? Despite my immediate reaction, I didn't want to be a total jerk. I mean, I was already there, standing awkwardly in her living room. So I figured the least I could do was try to make the situation less uncomfortable. Maybe it wouldn't be as bad as I thought. Maybe her personality would make up for the fact that she'd clearly misrepresented herself. Spoiler alert, it didn't. I tried to make conversation. I asked her about her day, about her music taste, about her master plan for the future. Anything to break the tension. But every answer she gave was so bland. Like, I don't even remember half of what she said because it was so unremarkable. She had no energy, no spark, no nothing. At one point, I put on some music, hoping it would help. It didn't. Her vibe was just completely off, and I felt like I was trying to pull teeth just to keep the conversation alive. And then there was the elephant in the room. She wasn't who she made herself out to be. That fact hung over everything like a dark cloud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been tricked, like I'd been lured into some weird social experiment where the punchline was my disappointment. I sat there, trying my best to stay polite, but inside I was screaming. I couldn't do this. I couldn't subject myself to an entire evening of forced conversation and fake smiles, pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. So I did what any coward would do. I made up an excuse. I don't even remember what I said. Probably something about having to wake up early or some vague, "Oh, I just remembered." Nonsense, but it worked. I dipped out of there as fast as I could, feeling both relieved and guilty. Does that make me a bad person? Honestly, probably. I knew I'd hurt her feelings, and I don't feel great about that. But at the same time, I wasn't going to sit there and fake my way through a date with someone who'd essentially catfished me. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. The very next weekend, I went to a party. It was one of those casual, everyone knows everyone kind of deals, so I wasn't expecting any surprises. But as fate would have it, I ended up talking to this girl who, as it turned out, was Rachel's roommate. We were chatting about random stuff when she asked, "Hey, didn't you hang out with Rachel last week?" My stomach dropped. Yeah, I said cautiously, and then she said something that completely changed how I saw the whole situation. Apparently, Rachel had been lying to everyone. She wasn't just misrepresenting herself online, she was doing it in real life too. According to her roommate, Rachel had painted herself as this super outgoing, adventurous, fun-loving person. But once people actually got to know her, they realized it was all an act. She never left her room, barely talked to anyone, and had this weird, unsettling vibe that made everyone in their suite feel uneasy. Hearing that was like a light bulb going off in my head. It wasn't just me, everyone felt off around her. I wasn't crazy or overly judgmental. She really was passing herself off as someone she wasn't. Let me tell you about Sarah. Oh, Sarah, the queen of overreaction, the empress of unnecessary drama, and the reigning champion of how to be the absolute worst at communication. If I sound angry, it's because I am. This isn't just a story about a failed connection. It's a goddamn case study in why some people should come with a warning label. It started as they do. I matched with Sarah on a dating app. She was cute, appeared smart and collective, and had her crap together, or so I thought. We started talking, and while she wasn't exactly a conversational powerhouse, I figured she was just busy. She told me she'd graduated college and was working full-time while also pursuing her master's degree. Impressive, right? I wasn't intimidated or anything. I respected the hustle. But here's the thing. Being busy doesn't give you a free pass to be a condescending asshole. From the beginning, our texts were sparse. She was skimpy with her responses, like she was rationing words or something. I'd send a question, and she'd take hours to reply with something like yep or LOL. But hey, I get it. People have lives. I'm not the type to expect constant texting. I don't need a play-by-play of your day. Still, it was hard to get a read on her. Was she interested? Was she just bored? Who knows? But I figured, whatever, let's see where this goes. One night, we were actually having a decent back and forth. It felt like I was finally breaking through her wall of one-word answers. We were joking around, talking about her master's program, and I asked her if she was still working on homework. No response. Okay, fine. She's probably busy. I get it. I'm not going to lose sleep over a delayed text. Before I went to bed, I sent her a quick follow-up. Guess so, good night. Just a polite, no-pressure message to close out the conversation. I didn't think twice about it. The next day, she texts me out of the blue with this paragraph about how I'm way too intense, and how her master's program is way more important than responding to me. Wait, what? I stared at my phone, trying to process the absolute absurdity of what I was reading. Intense? For what? Saying goodnight? I wasn't blowing up her phone with desperate pleas for attention. I wasn't double texting her every 5 minutes. I sent her a single goodnight text because she didn't respond. That's intense? So I calmly replied that it wasn't a big deal, that I wasn't upset she didn't respond, and that I was just saying goodnight. I thought maybe she was having a bad day or something. I mean, who flies off the handle over a goodnight text? But Sarah wasn't done. Oh no. She proceeded to go on this tirade about how I wouldn't understand what it's like to be as busy as she is because I never went to college. Let me repeat that she came at me for not going to college. Now, let me tell you a little something about me. I manage a gym full-time. I work 55 plus hours a week. I'm on my feet all day, dealing with customers, employees, scheduling, payroll, and everything else that comes with running a business. I may not have a fancy degree, but I've worked my ass off to build a career I'm proud of. So when Sarah decided to pull the "you wouldn't get it, you didn't go to college" card, I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, I wouldn't get it?" I replied. "You're right, I don't know what it's like to be busy at all. Just working 55-hour weeks managing a gym. Must be nice to have all that free time to text back, LOL, once every 6 hours. Okay, maybe that was a little snarky. But can you blame me? She was acting like her life was so much harder and more important than mine, like her master's program gave her some kind of moral superiority. Her response? She called me crazy, told me I was delusional, and that I needed a psychologist. Oh, I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't realize saying good night and defending my career choices was a sign of mental instability. My bad. Clearly, I should have just bowed down to your academic greatness and apologized for daring to exist in your busy, oh so important world. At that point, I was done. I told her I was happy with my life, that I didn't need validation from someone who couldn't even hold a normal conversation, and that I wished her the best. R.I.P. Sarah. But here's the thing. Even after I ended it, I couldn't stop thinking about how ridiculous the whole situation was. Like, what the hell was her problem? Was she so stressed out from her master's program that she couldn't handle basic human interaction? Or was she just one of those people who thinks their time is more valuable than everyone else's? Honestly, I think it was the latter. The more I think about it, the more I realize that Sarah wasn't just busy, she was self-absorbed. She didn't want a conversation, she wanted an audience. She didn't want a connection, she wanted validation. And when I didn't worship at the altar of her accomplishments, she lashed out. And you know what? Good riddance. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. Here's the thing, I have nothing against people who are busy. I get it. Life is hectic. But being busy doesn't give you the right to treat people like crap. It doesn't make you better than anyone else. And it sure as hell doesn't mean you get to act like your time is more valuable than theirs. So yeah, R.I.P. Sarah. I hope you find someone who's willing to put up with your nonsense. But as for me, I'm good. I've got a career I'm proud of, friends who actually respect me, and most importantly, a newfound appreciation for the block button. I've had some strange and uncomfortable experiences with dating apps, but this one takes the cake. It started out fairly normal, just two people chatting, enjoying some good vibes, and planning to meet up. But by the end of it, I found myself checking over my shoulder every time I left my house. Looking back, I wish I had seen the warning signs sooner. I matched with a woman named Sophie on Bumble. Sophie came across as someone who wasn't just looking for a hookup, which I appreciated, had too many of these types in the past which I did not want again. I wasn't necessarily trying to find my soulmate, but I also wasn't interested in something purely casual at the time. We started chatting, and Sophie was great to talk to, and after a couple of days of texting, she suggested meeting up for coffee at Starbucks. I was in. We met at a cute little cafe not too far from where I lived. Sophie looked just like her pictures, and she had this bubbly energy that immediately put me at ease. We talked about our favorite books, our dream travel destinations, and our mutual disdain for pineapple on pizza. She was charming and easy to talk to, and I left the date thinking it had gone really well. Over the next week, we kept texting, and Sophie seemed even more interested in me than I'd expected. She'd send me long, excited messages about her day, ask about mine, and suggest new places we could go together. At first, I was flattered. It's nice to feel wanted, and Sophie really seemed to be into me. But then it started to feel a little overwhelming. She'd text me constantly, morning, afternoon, and night. If I didn't respond within an hour, she'd send follow-up messages. Hey, are you okay? Or did I say something wrong? I tried to brush it off as enthusiasm, but it was starting to feel like she was expecting way more of my time and attention than I could reasonably give. The second date came around, and we met up for a walk in the park. It was pleasant enough, but Sophie kept dropping little comments that felt oddly intense for someone I'd only just started seeing. She'd say things like, I feel like I can really be myself around you, or I think we have something really special. I smiled and nodded along, but in the back of my head, I was thinking, we've only been on 2 dates. How can you feel that way already? After that, things escalated quickly. She started showing up at places where I happened to be, my favorite coffee shop, the gym, even the grocery store. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. But then it happened again. And again. One day, I was at the gym when I noticed Sophie on the treadmill a few rows away. She wasn't wearing workout clothes. She was just walking casually, staring at her phone. I waved, trying to keep things light, and she came over immediately. "Hey, fancy seeing you here," she said, grinning. "Yeah, hey," I said, glancing at the weights in my hands. "You work out here too?" "Not really," she said, shrugging. "I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by." It felt weird, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just nodded and went back to my workout. But after that, it seemed like Sophie was always in the neighborhood. The breaking point came when I was at a friend's party. It was a small gathering, just a handful of people hanging out and playing board games. I hadn't told Sophie about it, so I was completely shocked when she walked through the door halfway through the night. "Hey," she said, smiling like it was the most normal thing in the world. My friends exchanged confused glances as I pulled Sophie aside. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice low. "Oh, I saw your Instagram story," she said casually. "I figured I'd come by and say hi." I hadn't even thought to check who'd viewed my story, but apparently, Sophie had been keeping close tabs on me. "This is a private party," I said, trying to keep my cool. "You can't just show up uninvited." She looked hurt. "I thought you'd be happy to see me." "I didn't invite you," I said firmly. "You need to leave." She stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked out without another word. I spent the rest of the night trying to explain to my friends what had just happened. After that, I stopped responding to Sophie's messages. I thought she'd get the hint and move on, but instead she doubled down. She started leaving voicemails, some of them angry, others tearful. She'd say things like, "I don't understand why you're ignoring me. I thought we had something real. And you're not even giving me a chance to explain myself." One night, I came home to find a handwritten note taped to my door. It said, "I'm sorry if I scared you. I just want to talk. Please call me." That was the last straw. I blocked her number, deleted her from every social media platform, and made sure my Instagram stories were set to private. For weeks, I felt like I was looking over my shoulder every time I left the house. I never saw Sophie again, but the whole experience left me shaken. I matched with a Scandinavian guy on Bumble named Eric. He had pics of him hiking through snowy mountains, lounging by a bonfire, and holding what looked like a giant fish he'd caught on a fishing trip. His bio was short and to the point: adventurer, amateur chef, looking for someone to make me laugh. We started chatting, and he was sweet and cool and a little cocky. He told me about his job as a software engineer, his love of the outdoors, and how he'd recently moved to the city to experience something new. He also mentioned that he was still adjusting to life in a tiny apartment after growing up with endless space back home in Norway. After a week of messaging, Eric asked if I'd like to come over for dinner. He said he loved cooking for people and wanted to show off his amazing salmon recipe. I was hesitant about going to his place for a first date, but he assured me it would be casual and low pressure. Plus, the idea of being cooked for by a Viking chef was strangely appealing. The night of the date, I showed up at his apartment building, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. He buzzed me in, and when I walked into his unit, I was immediately impressed. The place was small but cozy, with minimalist Scandinavian decor, lots of light wood, neutral tones, and candles. It looked like something out of a home design magazine. "Welcome," Eric said, flashing me a warm smile. He was wearing an apron and holding a wooden spoon, which was somehow both adorable and very attractive. The smell of roasted salmon and fresh dill filled the air, and I could hear soft jazz playing in the background. It felt so comfortable, like he'd put real effort into making the evening special. "Wow, this is amazing," I said, taking off my coat. "Thank you," he said. "Make yourself at home. Dinner's almost ready." As I settled onto the couch, I heard a door creak open behind me. I turned around just in time to see a man step out of one of the bedrooms. He was about the same age as Eric, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, and had the kind of bedhead that suggested he'd just woken up from a nap. "Oh hey," he said, rubbing his eyes. "You must be Eric's date." Before I could respond, Eric poked his head out of the kitchen. "Oh yeah, this is Oscar. He's my roommate." Oscar plopped down in the armchair across from me, grinning like we were old friends. "Nice to meet you. So, where are you from?" I glanced at Eric, who looked a little sheepish. Nice to meet you too, I said, trying to hide my confusion. I'm from here, actually. Oscar nodded, then leaned forward like he was about to interview me. What do you do for work? How did you and Eric meet? Are you into hiking, or is that just his thing? Before I could answer, Eric appeared with 2 glasses of wine. Oscar, don't you have something to do? He asked, his tone light but pointed. Oscar shrugged. Not really. I was just going to hang out. Is that okay? I smiled awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Eric shot me an apologetic look and handed me a glass of wine before disappearing back into the kitchen. For the next 10 minutes, Oscar peppered me with questions about my job, my hobbies, my family, even my favorite Netflix shows. He wasn't mean or rude, but his energy was overwhelming. I felt like I was being interrogated by someone who was trying way too hard to be my best friend. Finally, Eric called us to the table, and I thought, great, maybe Oscar will go do something else now. But no, he pulled up a chair and joined us, as if it were completely normal for a roommate to third wheel a first date. Wow, this looks amazing, I said, trying to focus on the food. Thanks, Eric said, smiling at me. I hope you like salmon. Before I could take a bite, Oscar chimed in. Oh, you're in for a treat. Eric makes the best salmon. He learned the recipe from his grandmother. Right, Eric? Eric nodded, clearly trying to keep his cool. Yeah, that's right. It's a family recipe. Oscar launched into a story about the time Eric had tried to cook the same dish for a group of friends and accidentally set off the fire alarm. Eric laughed nervously, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. As the meal went on, Oscar continued to dominate the conversation. He told me about his job, his recent breakup, and his plans to adopt a dog. He even started giving me fun facts about Eric, like how he's afraid of spiders and once got lost in the woods for 6 hours during a camping trip. At one point, Eric tried to steer the conversation back to me, asking about my favorite travel destinations. But before I could answer, Oscar jumped in with a story about his trip to Iceland. By the time we finished dinner, I was mentally drained. Eric offered to walk me to my car, and I eagerly accepted, grateful for the chance to escape Oscar's relentless chatter. As we walked outside, Eric sighed. I'm so sorry about Oscar. He's a lot. It's okay, I said, smiling weakly. He seems nice. Eric groaned. He's a good guy, but he doesn't know how to give people space. I told him I had a date tonight, but I guess he didn't take the hint. I nodded, unsure of what to say. Eric was great, handsome, sweet, and genuinely interesting, but the thought of dealing with Oscar on a regular basis was daunting. When we reached my car, Eric asked if I'd like to go out again. I hesitated for a moment before saying, maybe. Let me think about it. He smiled, looking a little disappointed but understanding. Of course. Take your time. We said goodbye, and I drove home, replaying the night in my head. As much as I liked Eric, I couldn't shake the feeling that Oscar would always be there, lurking in the background like an overzealous chaperone. The next day, Eric texted me to apologize again for Oscar's behavior. I told him it was fine, but I didn't think we were a good match. He was polite and understanding, and we wished each other the best. I'll admit it, I ignored a lot of red flags on this one. Like a lot. Looking back, I'm not sure if I was just bored, lonely, or too blinded by lust to connect the dots. But I ended up walking straight into one of the most unhinged situations of my life. And, well, let this be a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can just ride it out when the warning signs are practically screaming at them. It all started when I met Amanda on a dating app. Her profile was bold, pictures of her covered in tattoos, including a few that were undeniably edgy. One in particular stood out, the word daddy tattooed, not once, but twice on different parts of her body. I know, red flag number 1. But at the time, I thought it was kind of hot in that bad decisions make good stories kind of way. Her bio said she was mostly a lesbian but open to fun, which should have been red flag number 2, but again, I ignored it. She messaged me first, and her energy was magnetic, flirty, confident, and refreshingly blunt. She made it clear that she wasn't looking for anything serious, just a good time. I figured why not? We decided to meet up a few nights later at a bar downtown. When Amanda walked in, she was exactly how she described herself, wild, tattooed, and unapologetically sexy. She had this carefree attitude that made her impossible to look away from. We hit it off immediately, laughing over drinks and trading sarcastic jokes. Honestly, it was one of the better first meetups I'd had in a while. By the end of the night, It was clear what was going to happen next. We went back to my place, things heated up quickly, and well, one thing led to another. Afterward, we fell asleep pretty early, probably around midnight or so. When I woke up around 3 in the morning, I noticed she wasn't in bed. I got up to check, thinking maybe she was in the bathroom or something, but nope, she was gone. No text, no note, no goodbye. Red flag number 3. I figured, whatever, maybe that's just her thing. No big deal. And honestly, I didn't give it much thought after that. But about a week later, Amanda called me out of the blue. She wanted to come over again. I hesitated for a second, remembering her vanishing act, but she sounded so casual and fun on the phone that I figured it couldn't hurt. That night, she came over, and things started off just like before. Easy conversation, casual vibes, no pressure. But when things got intimate, she made a request that caught me off guard. Don't look me in the eyes. At first, I thought she was joking. I laughed and said, okay, sure, but she stared at me dead serious and said, no, I mean it. Don't look at me. Red flag number 4. I decided not to make a big deal out of it. Everyone has their quirks, right? So I went along with it, but the vibe was definitely different. It felt a little like she was somewhere else entirely, emotionally shutting me out while still being physically present. Afterward, she stayed for a bit, but there was this strange tension, like she was keeping me at arm's length even though she was the one who came over in the first place. The next time we hooked up, things got even weirder. Right before we started, she flat out told me, let's only do it doggy style. I don't want you looking at me at all. Red flag number 5. At this point, I wasn't sure why I was still going along with this. Maybe I was too curious or too caught up in her magnetic, chaotic energy to just walk away. But I agreed, and it became a pattern. She'd call or text, come over, and make the same requests. No eye contact, no positions where I could see her face. It was like she wanted to completely disconnect from the experience. After a few weeks of this, I started to feel uneasy about the whole situation. I wasn't sure what her deal was, but it was clear that there was something she wasn't telling me. I decided to put a little distance between us, figuring she'd take the hint. That's when my roommate Jake dropped a bomb on me. Wait, you're hooking up with Amanda? He asked one night when I casually mentioned her name. Yeah, why? I said, instantly suspicious of his tone. Jake gave me a look. Dude, I know her. She's from my hometown. She's unhinged. Red flag number 6. What do you mean? I asked, suddenly feeling like I was in way over my head. She has a reputation, Jake said, lowering his voice. She's known for losing it on people. Like full-on destroying people's property if she doesn't get her way. One guy she dated had his car keyed and all his clothes burned after they broke up. Red flag number 7. I sat there, processing what he'd just told me. On one hand, it made sense. She definitely had a chaotic vibe about her. On the other hand, I wasn't sure what to do with this information. Should I cut things off completely? Would that just make things worse? I decided to play it cool and slowly start distancing myself from Amanda. But Amanda wasn't having it. When I stopped responding to her texts right away, she started texting more. And when I didn't give her the attention she wanted, she sent walls of texts, paragraph after paragraph, about how I was disrespecting her as a woman, and how she wasn't just a piece of meat. Red flag numbers 8 and 9. She left me voice messages, 2 long, rambling ones where her tone would swing wildly from angry to tearful. In one, she called me a coward for not being honest with her. In another, she accused me of leading her on and playing with her emotions. It was confusing and exhausting, especially considering she'd made it clear from the start that she wasn't looking for anything serious. The final straw came when she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was home alone, and when I heard the knock on the door, I had a sinking feeling it was her. Sure enough, there she was, standing in the hallway with this intense look in her eyes. Hey, she said, her voice sharp. Why have you been ignoring me? I haven't been ignoring you, I said, trying to keep my cool. I've just been busy. Bullshit, she snapped. You've been avoiding me, and I deserve to know why. At that point, I realized there was no way to diffuse the situation without making it worse. I told her I needed space, and that things weren't working out. She just stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable, before turning on her heel and storming off. I didn't hear from her for a few days, which made me think that maybe, just maybe, she'd moved on. But then the text started again. More walls of text, more accusations, more emotional whiplash. I ended up blocking her number and deleting her from every app one could think of. I'm not someone who falls for grand gestures or sweeping romantic cliches. I like to think of myself as a realist, pragmatic, grounded, and definitely not the type to get swept off my feet by someone playing the perfect gentleman routine. But sometimes, even the most guarded among us can get blindsided. That's exactly what happened when I matched with Ethan on Hinge that time. Let me go into detail. Ethan wasn't just good-looking, he was put together. His profile screamed sophistication, sharply tailored suits, perfectly combed hair, and captions like driven by ambition and fueled by espresso. It was a little pretentious, sure, but he was also charming in a way that felt deliberate, like he'd crafted the perfect online persona to stand out. His messages were articulate, "No, what you doing?" at 2 a.m., or lazy one-word replies. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered the details I shared, and always seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. He made me feel seen, which is rare when you're wading through the swamp of dating apps. After a week of texting, Ethan asked me out to dinner. Not for drinks at a dive bar or coffee at some chain cafe, dinner. He suggested a fancy French bistro I'd only ever seen on Instagram, the kind of place where the waiters wear bow ties and the menus don't have prices. I was impressed, but also a little suspicious. Who goes all out like this on a first date? Still, I figured, why not? It's not every day you meet someone who actually puts in effort. The night of the date, Ethan arrived right on time, dressed in another impeccably tailored suit. He greeted me with a charming smile and a bouquet of flowers, actual flowers. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something like that for me. "You look stunning," he said, holding the door open for me as we walked into the restaurant. The date started off well. Ethan was polite, attentive, and had this old-school charm that felt almost too good to be true. He pulled out my chair, poured my wine, and listened intently as I talked about my job, my hobbies, and my plans for the future. Every now and then, he'd interject with a well-timed compliment or a witty remark that made me laugh. But as the evening went on, I started to notice something off. For one, Ethan didn't talk much about himself. Whenever I asked him a question, he'd deflect or give a vague answer before steering the conversation back to me. At first, I thought he was just being modest, but it started to feel calculated, like he was avoiding something. Then there was the way he looked at me. It wasn't the usual kind of eye contact you make on a date. It was intense, almost predatory. Like he was studying me, cataloging every detail for some unknown purpose. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said at one point, his voice low and deliberate. I laughed nervously. "Thanks, but I'm just a regular person." He shook his head, smiling. "No, you're special. I can tell." It was flattering, sure, but also a little unsettling. After dinner, Ethan insisted on walking me to my car. I tried to politely decline, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "I just want to make sure you get home safe," he said, flashing that perfect smile again. As we walked, the conversation took a strange turn. "You know," he began, "I've been on a lot of dates, but none of them felt like this." "Like what?" I asked, glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. "Like fate," he replied, his tone so serious it made my skin crawl. I laughed awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. "Well, I'm glad you're having a good time." He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression suddenly intense. "I don't think you understand. This isn't just a good time. This is special. You're special." I forced a smile, trying to keep things light. "That's sweet of you to say, but maybe let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's just the first date." Ethan didn't seem to hear me. He reached out and gently touched my arm, his grip firm but not quite aggressive. "You won't have to worry about anything anymore. I'll take care of you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll see." When we reached my car, I thanked him for the evening and quickly got in, locking the doors behind me. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Ethan. "Good morning, beautiful. I hope you slept well. I can't stop thinking about you." I replied with a polite but neutral message, trying to set some boundaries. But Ethan didn't seem to understand the concept of boundaries. Over the next few days, he bombarded me with texts, calls, and even emails, all filled with over-the-top declarations of affection. "You're the only one I've ever felt this way about. I can't wait to see you again. I think I'm in love with you." By the end of the week, I was completely overwhelmed. I told him I needed some space, hoping he'd back off, but instead, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. "I just wanted to see you," he said, holding another bouquet of flowers. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Ethan, I told you I needed some time. I know, he said, stepping closer. But I can't stay away. I feel like we're meant to be together. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. Ethan, I think you should leave. His expression darkened for a moment, but then he smiled again, like nothing had happened. Of course. I'll give you some time. The next day, I woke up to find a bouquet of roses on my doorstep with a note that read, "You're mine now." That was the breaking point. I called the police and filed a restraining order, but even that didn't stop him. He started creating fake profiles on social media to contact me, sending messages like, "You can't keep me away. We belong together." One night, I heard a noise outside my bedroom window and saw a shadow moving in the backyard. My blood ran cold as I realized it was Ethan, lurking just out of sight. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. Eventually, the harassment stopped. I don't know if he finally got the message or if he just moved on to someone else, but I'll never forget the way he made me feel, like a prize he thought he could claim, no matter what I wanted. Looking back, I realized there were red flags from the very beginning. Ethan's perfection wasn't genuine. It was a mask, a carefully crafted illusion designed to lure me in. And I fell for it, because who doesn't want to believe in the idea of someone being perfect? But perfection is a lie, and sometimes it's a dangerous one. I matched with Liam on Tinder late one night while scrolling half-heartedly through the endless sea of potential dates. His profile wasn't anything decent, to be honest. Just a few basic pictures of him hiking, one of him holding a coffee cup, and another blurry, crappy shot that looked like it had been taken at a party. But what had caught my attention was his own bio. Introverted bookworm looking for someone to write the next chapter with. It was cheesy, but hey, it stood out from the usual 6-foot one, because apparently that matters nonsense. He messaged me first, as they do. I hate starting conversations on dating apps, and it's rare to find someone who takes the initiative. His opener was simple. "Hey, how's your night going?" I replied, and we started talking. Or at least, I started talking to him. Liam wasn't exactly a chatterbox, to say the least. His responses were short, almost robotic. I'd ask him questions to keep the conversation flowing, and he'd reply with one-word answers or vague comments. For example, I asked what his favorite book was, and he responded with, "Too many to choose." When I pressed further, he just said, "I like classics." Not exactly riveting stuff, but I figured maybe he was just shy. And besides, his pictures were cute enough to keep me interested. So when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner that weekend, I said yes. We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown. I got there first and was nervously sipping on a glass of water when he walked in. He looked just like his photos, tall, dark hair, clean-shaven, and wearing a neatly pressed button-up shirt. He smiled as he approached the table, and for a moment, I thought, maybe this will go better in person. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but pleasant. "Hey, Liam. It's nice to finally meet you," I replied, trying to mask my nervousness with enthusiasm. He smiled again, nodded, and that was it. No follow-up, no "how was your day?" Nothing. I brushed it off and started asking him questions to fill the silence. What he did for work, his favorite places to hike, whether he was a dog person or a cat person. He answered everything, but his responses were so short and lifeless that I felt like I was interrogating him. "So, what's the best hike you've ever been on?" I asked, hoping to spark some excitement. Probably Yosemite. It was cool." "Cool." That's all he had to say about Yosemite? One of the most breathtaking places in the country? I forced a smile and took a sip of my drink, mentally preparing myself for a long, awkward evening. The food arrived, and I tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, movies, music, childhood memories. But no matter what I brought up, Liam remained frustratingly quiet. He wasn't rude or dismissive, but he wasn't exactly engaging either. Honestly, it felt like I was on a date with a brick wall. After dinner, we walked to my car, and I thanked him for the evening. Despite the lackluster conversation, I felt bad for him. Maybe he was just nervous or socially awkward. I didn't want to be mean, so I told him I had a nice time. That's when he pulled out his phone. He started typing furiously, and a second later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Confused, I pulled it out and saw a message from him. "I had a great time. Hope you did too." I stared at the text, then back at him, and let out a nervous laugh. You know you can say that out loud, right?" He smiled sheepishly but didn't say anything. Just stood there, waiting for me to respond. Not wanting to make things even more awkward, I typed back, "Me too. Thanks for dinner." He nodded like this was the normal way to communicate and said, "Okay, good night." Then he turned and walked away without another word. That should have been the end of it. I should have cut my losses and moved on. But Liam texted me the next morning, and against my better judgment, I replied. At first, it was the same old pattern, short, boring texts with no personality. But then something changed. His messages became more frequent, more intense. He started texting me every hour, checking in on me like we'd been dating for months. "How's your day going? What are you up to now? Did you eat lunch yet?" It was overwhelming. I tried to gently put some distance between us, but he didn't seem to get the hint. If I didn't reply right away, he'd send follow-ups. "You there? Or is everything okay?" One night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom and saw that I had 6 missed texts from him. 6. The most recent one said, "I'm worried about you. Please respond." I stared at my phone, half asleep and fully creeped out. I hadn't even known this guy for a week, and he was acting like a clingy boyfriend. The final straw came a few nights later. I was home watching TV when I got a text from Liam. "I'm outside." My heart stopped. I hadn't told him where I lived. I cautiously peeked out the window, and there he was, standing on the sidewalk, staring up at my apartment. He wasn't holding flowers or anything romantic. He was just standing there, like some kind of silent sentinel. "What the hell are you doing here?" I texted him, too afraid to confront him in person. A moment later, my phone buzzed. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. You didn't text me back earlier." I immediately called my best friend, who told me to stay inside and lock the doors. Thankfully, Liam left after about 20 minutes, but the whole experience left me shaken. I blocked his number, unmatched him on Tinder, and deleted the app altogether. I matched with a Mexican-American woman on Tinder named Isabel. She was absolutely stunning, with long dark hair, striking hazel eyes, you name it. Perfect, right? Hold on to that thought, please. We started chatting, and she was hilarious. Effortlessly funny in a way that had me grinning at my phone like a fool. She told me she worked as a graphic designer, loved live music, and had a soft spot for dive bars with good margaritas. I was hooked. After a week of chatting, we decided to meet up at one of her favorite spots, a cozy bar with dim lighting, loud music, and a laid-back vibe. The night of the date, I was nervous but excited. When Isabel walked in, she looked even better in person, confident, stylish, and radiating that kind of energy that makes everyone in the room notice. We hugged, ordered drinks, and slid into a booth. From the start, we hit it off. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and she had this way of making me feel like I was the funniest guy in the world. We talked about everything, our favorite bands, bad movies we secretly loved, and the best tacos in the city. She told me a hilarious story about trying to teach her dog to skateboard, and I couldn't stop laughing. For a moment, I thought this might actually be going somewhere. But then, out of nowhere, the night took a turn. We were halfway through our second round of drinks when a guy stormed into the bar, his face twisted in anger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like he'd just walked off the set of a soap opera. His eyes scanned the room like he was searching for someone, and when they landed on Isabel, his expression darkened. "Isabel," he barked, his voice loud enough to cut through the music. I froze, my drink halfway to my mouth. Isabel stiffened, her smile vanishing. "Oh no," she muttered under her breath. Before I could ask what was going on, the guy stomped over to our booth, glaring at me like I'd just insulted his entire family. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, jerking his thumb in my direction. "Carlos, what are you doing here?" Isabel said, her voice sharp but controlled. What are you doing here, me?" he shot back. "I saw your post on Instagram. You think you can just move on like that? With this guy?" He jabbed a finger at me, and I suddenly felt like I'd wandered into someone else's drama. "Look, man," I said, trying to stay calm. "I don't know what this is about, but maybe we should all just—" "Shut up," Carlos snapped, cutting me off. "This has nothing to do with you." At this point, people in the bar were starting to notice. The bartender was eyeing us warily, and I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. "Carlos, you need to leave," Isabel said firmly. "We're done, okay? This isn't your business anymore." "Oh, it's my business," he said, leaning closer to the table. His gaze flicked to me, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just replace me? After everything we went through?" "I'm not doing this with you," Isabel said, standing up. "Go home." Carlos ignored her, his anger now fully focused on me. "You think you're better than me?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you can just walk in and take what's mine?" "Okay, first of all," I said, standing up as well, I'm not taking anything. You need to calm down. Big mistake. Carlos lunged at me, and before I knew it, we were nose to nose. For a second, I thought he was going to punch me, but the bartender intervened just in time. "Hey!" the bartender shouted, stepping between us. "Take it outside or take it home. Either way, you're done here." Carlos glared at me one last time before turning to Isabel. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. Then he stormed out of the bar, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and sat back down, my heart racing. Isabel looked mortified. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think he'd actually show up." "What the hell was that?" I asked, trying to process what had just happened. "That was my ex," she said, rubbing her temples. "We broke up a few months ago, but he's not handling it well." "No kidding," I said, glancing toward the door as if Carlos might come back at any second. "I thought he'd moved on," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think he'd still be keeping tabs on me." I didn't know what to say. Part of me felt bad for her. Clearly, she hadn't asked for this. But another part of me was wondering what kind of baggage I'd just stumbled into. "Maybe we should call it a night," I said finally. She nodded, looking genuinely upset. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." I walked her to her car, constantly glancing over my shoulder to make sure Carlos wasn't lurking in the shadows. She apologized again, saying she understood if I didn't want to see her again. I told her to stay safe and drove home, still shaken by the whole ordeal. The next day, Isabel texted me to apologize again. She said she'd filed a restraining order against Carlos and promised that he wouldn't be a problem anymore. I wished her the best, but I didn't respond. As much as I liked her, I wasn't ready to dive into that kind of drama. I matched with Marco on Bumble during an especially boring Wednesday night after a rubbish day at work. His profile told me worldly adventurer. Pictures of him hiking in the Swiss Alps, sipping espresso in Rome, and posing with locals in some cute picturesque village I couldn't even place on a map. At first, I hesitated to contact. Guys like Marco always seemed too good to be true and end in disaster. But I guess his messages were different, but I am no expert in this field, as you are about to find out. He wasn't trying too hard or flexing his passport. He asked genuine questions about me, what my dream destinations were, what kind of adventures I'd had in life. He seemed charming, grounded even. He told me he was only in town for a few weeks on business and wanted to meet someone who could show him the city through local eyes. It sounded innocent enough, and since I didn't have much else going on, I agreed to meet him for a drink that Friday night. When I arrived at the trendy rooftop bar he'd suggested, Marco was already there, seated at a table with a view of the skyline. He looked just like his photos, tall, dark hair, a sharp jawline, and dressed in a way that was effortlessly chic. He even had that faint European charm about him, leaning in just slightly when he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "Wow," he said, his accent thick but smooth. "You're even more beautiful in person." I laughed, brushing it off, but I couldn't help feeling flattered. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like nothing else mattered but the conversation you were having with him. We talked for hours. He told me stories about his travels, hiking Machu Picchu, getting lost in Tokyo, road tripping across Australia. Every story was more captivating than the last, and I found myself hanging on to his every word. "I collect souvenirs from every place I visit," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Something unique, something that reminds me of the people I've met." "That's so cool," I said. "What's the most interesting souvenir you've collected?" He smiled, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. "Oh, it's hard to choose. Each one is special in its own way." Toward the end of the night, Marco leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Have you ever thought about disappearing? Just leaving it all behind and starting over somewhere new?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Not really. I mean, I like my life here. My friends, my job. Why do you ask?" He shrugged, swirling the last of his drink in his glass. "Sometimes I think people get too attached to their routines. They forget there's a whole world out there, waiting to be explored." I nodded, not quite sure where he was going with this. "I guess that's true, but I think having roots is important too." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe roots just hold you back." After we finished our drinks, Marco walked me to my car. The streets were quieter than I expected, and the distant hum of traffic filled the silence between us. "I had a great time tonight," he said, his voice soft but deliberate. "Me too," I replied, genuinely meaning it. "I'd love to see you again," he added, taking a step closer. I hesitated. As charming as Marco was, something about his intensity felt off, like he was too invested too quickly. But before I could respond, he smiled and said, "No pressure. Just think about it." I nodded, grateful for the out he'd given me, and got into my car. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about him, something lurking beneath that polished, worldly exterior. The next day, Marco texted me. "Last night was perfect. Let's do it again soon." I replied with a polite but non-committal message, saying I'd enjoyed myself but wasn't sure when I'd be free. He didn't text back right away, which was a relief. That night, I was scrolling through Instagram when I noticed something weird. Marco had tagged me in a post, a picture of a single candle, flickering in the dark. The caption read, "To new beginnings." My stomach tightened. I hadn't given him my Instagram handle. I clicked on his profile, and what I saw made my blood run cold. His feed was filled with pictures of women, smiling, laughing, posing in beautiful locations. But the captions were all eerily similar, a moment frozen in time. A treasure I'll never forget, my most cherished souvenir. I scrolled further and noticed something even more disturbing. The women stopped appearing after a certain point. New pictures replaced them, landscapes, objects, and places, but no people. It was as if they'd vanished. The next time Marco texted me, I didn't respond. But that didn't stop him. Over the next week, he sent me message after message, asking when we could meet again. One night, he called me. I didn't answer. A minute later, I got a text. "I'm outside." I froze. Slowly, I walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. Sure enough, there he was, standing across the street, staring up at my apartment. I grabbed my phone and texted him. "What the hell are you doing here?" A moment later, he replied, "I wanted to see you. Don't be afraid. You're special to me." I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Marco was gone. I filed a report and blocked his number, but the experience left me shaken. A few weeks later, I was at a coffee shop when I overheard a conversation at the next table. Two women were talking about a guy they'd met on Bumble, an Italian traveler who seemed too good to be true. My heart raced as I listened to their stories. One of them had gone on a date with him, and the other had matched with him, but never met up. They described him perfectly, the accent, the charm, the talk of souvenirs. I interrupted them and asked if his name was Marco. Their faces went pale. I had matched up with this guy on Hinge, who seemed like a total catch. His name was Rahul. He was Indian American, had a great smile, and his profile was full of things that made him seem like the kind of guy you'd want to bring home to meet your family. He described himself as an entrepreneur, world traveler, and foodie. In one of his pictures, he was skydiving, and in another, he was holding a puppy. Basically, he hit all the right notes for me. Rahul was quick to message me, and he made a great first impression. He was confident but not cocky, funny without trying too hard, and genuinely seemed interested in getting to know me. We talked about our favorite cuisines, our love of travel, and even bonded over how both of our parents had tried to set us up with someone from their friend's family, at least once. For our first date, Rahul suggested dinner at a high-end restaurant downtown. I was impressed. Most of my dating app matches would suggest grabbing coffee or drinks, but Rahul wanted to go all out. I figured he must be serious, and I liked that. The night of the date, I dressed up a little more than usual, feeling excited and maybe even a bit nervous. When I arrived at the restaurant, Rahul was already there, waiting for me at the bar. He stood up as I walked in, greeted me with a warm smile, and complimented my outfit. He was just as handsome as his pictures, and his energy was infectious. We were seated at a cozy table, and from the start, the conversation was easy. He told me about his work, how he'd started his own business, and how it had given him the freedom to travel and live life on his own terms. I was intrigued. Who doesn't love an ambitious guy? As the appetizers arrived, Rahul started asking me about my goals. "What do you want out of life?" he asked, his tone serious but encouraging. It felt like an interview question, but I went along with it, telling him about my career aspirations and my dream of traveling to South America someday. He listened intently, nodding and smiling, and I felt like he genuinely cared about what I had to say. Then, somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, the conversation took a weird turn. "You know," Rahul said, leaning forward, "I think you have a lot of potential." I blinked, confused. Thanks." "No, I mean it," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You seem like someone who's ambitious, who wants more out of life. Am I right? I guess so, I said, feeling a little unsure of where this was going. That's exactly the kind of mindset I look for in people, he said, his tone growing more intense. Have you ever thought about starting your own business? I laughed nervously. Not really. I'm pretty happy with my job. That's the thing, he said, lowering his voice like he was about to tell me a secret. Most people think they're happy, but they're stuck in this cycle, working for someone else, trading their time for money, never really building anything of their own. Don't you want more than that? At this point, alarm bells started ringing in my head. I had a sinking feeling about where this was going, but I decided to play along to see if I was right. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound curious. Rahul smiled, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. I'm part of an amazing business opportunity, he said, pulling out his phone. It's changed my life, and I think it could change yours too. He opened an app and started showing me a slideshow. Yes, an actual slideshow about a multi-level marketing company he was involved in. He called it a network of entrepreneurs who were unlocking financial freedom by selling health and wellness products. It's not just about the products, he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. It's about building a team, empowering others, and creating passive income. The best part, you can do it all from your phone. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Was this really happening? Was I actually on a date with someone who was trying to recruit me into an MLM? That's interesting, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. It is, he said, mistaking my politeness for genuine interest. I started just a year ago, and now I'm making more money than I ever did at my old job. And the people I've met, they're like family. It's not just a business, it's a lifestyle. He kept going, showing me pictures of luxury cars, exotic vacations, and smiling groups of people who were apparently all part of this amazing opportunity. I tried to steer the conversation back to normal date topics, but Rahul wasn't having it. He was on a roll, and nothing I said could stop him. By the time dessert arrived, I was mentally exhausted. I'd gone from being excited about the date to wanting to crawl under the table and disappear. So, Rahul said, flashing me a confident smile, what do you think? Are you ready to take control of your future? I took a deep breath, trying to figure out the nicest way to say no. I think it's great that you're passionate about this, I said carefully, but I don't think it's for me. Rahul's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. That's okay, he said. I get it, it's a lot to take in, but I really think you'd be amazing at this. How about we set up a call with my mentor? He can explain it better than I can. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced a smile and said, I'll think about it. After the date, I went home and immediately blocked Rahul on Hinge. But he wasn't done with me yet. The next day, he sent me a text. Hey, just wanted to follow up. I really think you'd be a great fit for the team. Let me know if you'd like to chat more about it. I didn't respond. A week later, I got another text. I hope you're doing well. Just wanted to remind you that the door is always open if you're ready to change your life. At that point, I blocked his number. Looking back, I can't believe I didn't see the red flags sooner. Rahul was charming, sure, but the moment he started talking about unlocking financial freedom, I should have known something was up. Lesson learned. If someone on a dating app seems too good to be true, they might just be trying to sell you something. Dating apps can lead you down some strange roads, but nothing prepared me for the absolute nightmare of this Tinder date. It started out like any other match, casual banter, shared hobbies, and some flirty back and forth that made me think this could be something fun. She was a Korean-American woman, absolutely gorgeous, and seemed really laid back. Let's call her Gina. Gina and I had an instant connection over text. We talked about our favorite movies, swapped Spotify playlists, and even joked about how awkward first dates can be. She suggested we meet up at a karaoke bar, and honestly, I loved the idea. It was unique, fun and casual, with none of that staring awkwardly across the table energy that so many first dates have. When the night of the date rolled around, I was feeling good. I arrived at the karaoke bar a few minutes early and grabbed a booth. The place was lively, with groups of friends belting out pop songs and sipping on soju cocktails. It felt like the perfect spot to loosen up and have a good time. When Gina walked in, I was blown away. She looked even better in person, stylish but effortless, with this confident energy that made everyone in the room glance her way. She greeted me with a warm smile, and we immediately hit it off. We ordered drinks, and the conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. She told me about growing up with strict parents who wanted her to be a doctor, how she rebelled by majoring in art, and her plans to open her own studio someday. I told her about my love of cooking and how I'd been trying to perfect my kimchi fried rice recipe. She laughed and said she'd be the judge of that someday. Eventually, we decided to start singing. I chose a cheesy 80s ballad, and she picked a K-pop song that she absolutely nailed. We were laughing, clinking glasses, and having the kind of first date that makes you hope there'll be a second. But then things took a turn. After a couple of hours, we were sitting back in the booth, sipping our drinks, when Gina got this faraway look in her eyes. I asked if she was okay, and she hesitated before saying, "There's something I should probably tell you." My stomach did a little flip. That's never a good sign on a first date. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "What's up?" She took a deep breath and said, "My ex-boyfriend left me because he thought I was possessed." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but her face stayed completely serious. "I'm not kidding," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He said there's something wrong with me, that I have some kind of spirit attached to me." I blinked, not sure how to respond. What do you mean? Like he thought you were haunted or something?" She nodded. "It started a couple of years ago. Weird things would happen around me, lights flickering, stuff moving. At first, I thought it was just coincidences, but then I started having these episodes." "Episodes?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. She looked down at her drink, swirling it around. "Sometimes I black out, and when I come to, people tell me I was saying things I don't remember. My ex said my voice changes, like it's not me speaking." I let out a nervous laugh, hoping she'd crack a smile and tell me this was all some elaborate joke. But she didn't. She just stared at me with those dark, serious eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Are you messing with me right now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she said firmly. "I wish I was." There was an awkward silence, and I was about to suggest we call it a night when it happened. Gina's eyes rolled back in her head, and she let out this guttural, animalistic sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Her body went rigid, and she started muttering under her breath in a voice that didn't sound like hers. I froze, my brain scrambling to figure out what the hell was going on. Was she having a seizure? A panic attack? Was this some kind of prank? "Gina," I said, my voice shaky. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Instead, she started speaking louder, but it wasn't in English or Korean, for that matter. It was some guttural, raspy language I didn't recognize. Her hands clenched into fists, and her whole body seemed to tremble. I panicked. I looked around the bar, hoping someone might notice and come over to help, but everyone else was too busy singing and laughing to pay attention. "Gina, you're scaring me," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. The second I touched her, her head snapped toward me, and her eyes locked onto mine. They didn't look like her eyes anymore. They were cold, almost lifeless. I flinched, pulling my hand back as she let out a low, menacing laugh. And then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Her body relaxed, and her eyes returned to normal. She blinked a few times, looking confused. "What just happened?" she asked, her voice soft and shaky. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't remember?" She shook her head, looking genuinely concerned. "No. Did I have one of my episodes?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to bolt out of there and never look back, but another part of me felt bad for her. She seemed terrified, like she didn't understand what was happening to her any more than I did. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think you did." She looked down at her hands, her face pale. "I'm so sorry. I told you this would happen." I didn't know what to say. What do you say when your date might be possessed by a spirit? After a few minutes of awkward silence, I suggested we call it a night. She nodded, and I walked her to her car. She apologized again, saying she understood if I didn't want to see her again. I told her to get home safe and watched as she drove away. That was the last time I saw Gina. The next day, she texted me, thanking me for being so understanding and saying she'd had a great time despite what happened. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. It's a Tuesday night, and I, in my infinite wisdom, I decide to log onto Tinder and swipe through endlessly while binging trashy reality TV. A girl's gotta multitask, right? That's when I come across Jake. Jake's profile? Oh, it was the holy grail of gym bro energy. Shirtless mirror selfies. Biceps the size of my head. A bio that read, "Work hard, train harder." Looking for someone who can keep up. Normally, I'd swipe left on that kind of guy faster than you can say protein shake, but something about him made me hesitate. Maybe it was the cheeky grin in his last photo, or maybe I was just bored. Either way, I had swiped right. Ding ding. It's a match. Jake wasted no time messaging me. Hey gorgeous, do you lift? I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my brain, but whatever, I played along. Only if you count carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He sent back a laughing emoji and asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. Sure, Jake. Why not? The first thing Jake said to me when we met at the cafe wasn't hi, or nice to meet you. No, it was, what's your body fat percentage? I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. When I told him I had no idea, he looked genuinely concerned. You should really know that. It's important to track your progress. Progress toward what? I didn't ask, because I already knew this was going to be a long date. Jake spent the next 40 minutes talking about his fitness routine. Not asking me about mine, just talking. He detailed his macros, his lifting schedule, his PRs, personal records for the uninitiated, and the time he almost blacked out doing deadlifts but pushed through because pain is weakness leaving the body. I nodded along, sipping my latte, and wondering why I hadn't just stayed home to watch more reality TV. The real kicker came when he offered to help me out with my diet. You're not eating enough protein, he said, despite having literally zero knowledge of what I eat. I can give you some recipes if you want. Oh, I'm good thanks, I replied, trying to change the subject. But Jake wasn't done. No, seriously. You'd feel so much better if you cleaned up your diet. I bet you're eating too many carbs. Jake, I said, forcing a smile. I'm happy with how I eat. He looked at me like I'd just admitted to a heroin addiction. Okay, but imagine how much better you could feel. By the time the date ended, I was exhausted. Not from Jake's overwhelming gym talk, but from resisting the urge to scream. I told him it was nice meeting him, a blatant lie, and went home, fully prepared to never speak to him again. But Jake had other plans. The next morning, I woke up to a text from him. Hey, great seeing you yesterday. I put together a workout plan for you. LMK if you have any questions. Attached was a PDF titled Jenna's Fitness Journey. I opened it out of morbid curiosity, and oh my god, it was a full-blown fitness manifesto. Meal plans, strength training schedules, cardio recommendations, and motivational quotes like, "A year from now, you'll wish you'd started today." I stared at my phone in disbelief. Was this guy for real? I ignored the text, because what else was I supposed to do? But Jake wasn't deterred. Over the next few days, he sent me more unsolicited advice, YouTube links to workout tutorials, articles about the benefits of intermittent fasting, and even a voice note where he explained the importance of progressive overload. I finally caved and texted back. Hey, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I'm not interested in changing my routine. His response? That's the problem. You're too comfortable. Growth comes from discomfort. I blocked him. But this story doesn't end there, oh no. A week later, I was at my gym, minding my own business on the treadmill, when I saw him. Jake. He was standing by the squat rack, decked out in a tank top that said no days off, and glaring at me like I'd personally insulted his mother. He walked over, and I prayed he wouldn't recognize me. No such luck. Jenna, he said, his tone both smug and accusatory. Didn't expect to see you here. Yeah, I mumbled, pretending to be very engrossed in my treadmill screen. He leaned on the machine, completely ignoring the fact that I was clearly trying to avoid him. So, you do go to the gym. That's good, but you're wasting your time on cardio. I stopped the treadmill and turned to face him. Jake, I'm just here to work out. Can you not? He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, just trying to help. I walked away, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. The final straw came a few days later when Jake showed up at my gym again, this time during a yoga class I was taking. He didn't join the class, he just stood outside the studio, watching through the glass like some kind of deranged fitness stalker. When the class ended, he cornered me by the lockers. You're wasting your potential, he said, shaking his head like a disappointed coach. You could be so much stronger if you'd just listened to me. I didn't even bother responding. I grabbed my stuff and left, texting the gym manager on my way out to let them know about the creepy guy harassing members. Jake was eventually banned from the gym, but the experience still haunts me. Every time I see a guy in a no-pain, no-gain tank top, I feel a wave of secondhand embarrassment. How embarrassing. I'll admit it, I was intrigued when I matched with Lucas on Hinge. His profile was different, but we all say that with a glimpse of hope by finding someone different. There were no self-obsessed gym selfies, No pictures of him holding a fish, and no shirtless mirror pictures. Instead, it was filled with snapshots of his own art studio. Paint splattered across canvases, close-ups of bold, abstract strokes, and one picture of Lucas standing in front of a massive mural, holding a paintbrush like it might set the world on fire. His bio was just as amazing to me: painter, dreamer. I see the world through color. Let's create something beautiful together. Okay, Lucas, you've got my attention, boy. He messaged me first, asking about my favorite artist. I panicked, because I'm not one of those cultured, art-savvy people who can rattle off names like Rothko or Basquiat. But he didn't seem to mind when I admitted my art knowledge was limited to whatever I'd seen on Pinterest. He said he loved introducing people to art, and that he'd love to show me his work sometime. It sounded romantic, right? The mysterious artist, the dream of being someone's muse. I was all in. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, Lucas was already there, sitting by the window with a sketch pad in his hands. He looked like the quintessential tortured artist: messy dark hair, paint-stained jeans, and a white button-up shirt that was somehow effortlessly disheveled. "You must be Jenna," he said, standing up and giving me this lopsided grin that made my stomach flip. "And you must be Lucas," I replied, trying to keep my cool. He gestured to the sketch pad in front of him. "I hope you don't mind. I was just warming up." I glanced down at the page and froze. It was a sketch of me. Not just any sketch, though me sitting in that exact coffee shop, wearing the exact outfit I had on. "Wow," I stammered. "That's amazing. How did you?" "I have a good memory," he said, his grin widening. "I like to imagine what people are like before I meet them." It was flattering, maybe a little weird, but I brushed it off. Artists are eccentric, right? Besides, the sketch really was incredible. We spent the next hour talking about art, creativity, and life in general. Lucas was intense, but in a way that felt passionate rather than overwhelming. He talked about how he saw the world as a series of colors and shapes, how he used his art to process emotions, and how he believed everyone deserved to see themselves as a masterpiece. At one point, he reached across the table and took my hand. "You have the most fascinating face," he said, his voice low and earnest. I laughed, feeling a little self-conscious. Thanks." "No, really," he insisted. "There's so much emotion in your eyes. So much depth. I'd love to paint you sometime." "Paint me?" Like, as in, sit there while he stares at me for hours? It sounded both exhilarating and terrifying. But before I could overthink it, I found myself saying, "Sure. Why not?" A week later, I went to Lucas's studio for the first time. It was exactly what you'd expect from an artist's workspace. Paint-splattered floors, canvases leaning against every wall, and the faint smell of turpentine lingering in the air. "This is where the magic happens," he said, spreading his arms like he was welcoming me into some sacred space. He led me to a stool in the center of the room and asked me to sit while he set up his supplies. As he worked, he kept glancing at me, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "Stay just like that," he said, picking up his brush. For the next hour, I sat perfectly still while Lucas painted. He didn't say much, just the occasional hum of approval or a quiet, beautiful. When he finally stepped back and put down his brush, I couldn't wait any longer. "Can I see it?" He hesitated, then turned the canvas toward me. My breath caught. It was me, but not like I'd ever seen myself before. The painting was raw, emotional, almost haunting. It was beautiful, but there was something about it that made me feel exposed. "You're incredible," Lucas said, his voice full of reverence. "You inspire me." I should have walked away after that. I should have taken the painting as a compliment, said thanks, and left. But I didn't. I let Lucas pull me deeper into his world. He started texting me constantly, asking when I could come back to the studio. He wanted to paint me again, he said. He needed to. I agreed, flattered by his obsession, but also a little unnerved. The second painting was even more intense than the first. This time, he painted me with tears streaming down my face, even though I hadn't cried. "It's how I see you," he explained when I asked him about it. "So much emotion, just beneath the surface. It's beautiful." I didn't know what to say. The next time I visited the studio, something felt different. Lucas was quieter than usual, more focused. He didn't ask me to sit for a painting. He just showed me around, pointing out the various canvases scattered throughout the room. That's when I saw it. A painting of me. But not just one. There were dozens. Each one was different, me smiling, me frowning, me staring into the distance. Some were from angles I didn't even recognize, like he'd painted me from memories I didn't know we'd shared. I trailed off, my voice shaking. Your collection, Lucas said, his tone matter-of-fact. I told you, you inspire me. You're my muse. I laughed nervously, trying to keep the mood light. That's a lot of me. He didn't laugh. You don't understand. I've never felt this way about anyone. You're everything I've been searching for. I backed away, suddenly feeling trapped. Lucas, I think I should go. He stepped closer, his expression darkening. Why? Don't you see how special you are? How much you mean to me? This is a lot. I stammered, my heart racing. You can't leave, he said, his voice sharp. Not yet. I'm not finished with you. I don't remember how I got out of there. I think I made up some excuse about needing to be somewhere and bolted before he could stop me. That night he texted me. You can't run from this. From us. You're mine now. I blocked his number, deleted Hinge, and didn't leave my apartment for days. A couple of weeks later, I was walking home from work when I noticed something strange. A gallery near my apartment had a new exhibit, and the poster in the window stopped me in my tracks. It was a painting of me. I went inside, my stomach in knots, and found the exhibit, the muse. Every painting in the collection was of, well, me. I confronted the gallery owner, demanding to know how they'd gotten the pieces. She told me the artist had submitted them anonymously, saying they were meant to celebrate the beauty of vulnerability. It began innocently enough. I matched with a guy on Hinge who seemed like the picture-perfect gentleman. He was British, had a sharp sense of humor, and his profile was full of little tidbits about himself. He loved museums, hiking, and cooking. He even had a picture of himself holding a cup of tea while reading, and I'll admit, I swooned just a little. Let's call him Edward. Edward and I hit it off right away. We had long conversations about books, travel, and our favorite cuisines. He had this posh, polite way of texting that made him seem like a character out of a Jane Austen novel. When he asked if I'd like to come over for dinner at his flat, I thought, why not? He seemed trustworthy, and he said he'd cook for me, which sounded romantic. The night of the date, I dressed up a little, feeling both excited and nervous. His flat was in a nice part of town, and when I arrived, he greeted me warmly. He was just as charming in person as he'd been over text, and his flat was immaculate. Minimalist decor, bookshelves lined with classics, and a faint smell of garlic wafting from the kitchen. It felt inviting, like stepping into the home of someone who really had his life together. Dinner's almost ready, Edward said, leading me to the kitchen. Make yourself comfortable. I sat at the small dining table while he stirred something on the stove. Everything seemed perfect, until I started to notice the decor. At first, it was subtle. There was a sleek knife block on the counter, which didn't seem unusual. But then I noticed a large display case mounted on the wall, filled with knives. Not just kitchen knives, but all kinds. Hunting knives, daggers, even a few that looked like they belonged in a medieval museum. Nice collection, I said, gesturing to the display. Edward glanced over his shoulder and smiled. Ah, yes. It's a bit of a hobby of mine. I nodded, trying not to overthink it. Everyone has hobbies, right? But as I looked around the room, I realized the knives weren't limited to just one display. There was another case on the opposite wall, this one filled with even larger blades, machetes, cleavers, and a sword that looked like it belonged to a Viking. Wow, you've got quite a collection, I said, trying to keep my tone light and casual. He chuckled. Yes, I've been collecting knives for years. Each one has a story. Some are antiques, some are from my travels, and a few are custom-made. I think of them as pieces of art. That sounded reasonable enough, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Something about the sheer number of blades in the room felt excessive. As we sat down to eat, Edward started telling me about the knives. At first, it was interesting. He talked about the craftsmanship and the history behind some of the pieces. But then his tone shifted. He started describing the art of blade work in a way that felt unnervingly intense. There's something so elegant about a well-balanced knife, he said, holding up his fork like it was a weapon. The precision, the control, it's an extension of the body, really. I forced a smile and nodded, but my appetite was quickly evaporating. He must have noticed my discomfort because he changed the subject, asking me about my favorite books and films. I tried to steer the conversation to safer ground, but every now and then he'd circle back to the knives, dropping little comments like, "You know, this one blade I have could cut through bone like butter." By the time we finished dinner, I was feeling more than a little uneasy. Edward offered to show me the rest of his flat, and I reluctantly agreed, hoping it would give me a better sense of who he was. The first few rooms were normal, his bedroom, a small office, but when he opened the door to what he called his hobby room, my stomach turned. The room was filled with knives. Display cases lined every wall, and there was even a glass cabinet in the middle of the room with a spotlight shining down on what looked like a ceremonial dagger. There were knives on stands, knives in frames, and knives hanging from hooks. It was overwhelming. "This is my pride and joy," Edward said, gesturing to the room with a wide smile. "Every piece here has been carefully curated. Some of these are extremely rare." I nodded, trying not to let my face betray how freaked out I was. "It's impressive," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer to one of the displays and took out a knife with a long, serrated blade. "This one," he said, holding it up, "was used in combat. It's a replica, of course, but the design is based on a blade that was actually used in World War II. "That's interesting," I said, taking a step back. He turned the knife over in his hands, his eyes gleaming. "You know, there's something almost poetic about the way a blade can cut through anything. It's so final, so precise. Don't you think?" Yeah," I muttered, my heart racing. "I think I should probably head out. It's getting late." Edward looked up, his expression suddenly serious. "Oh, of course. Let me walk you out." I grabbed my bag and followed him to the door, trying to act as casual as possible. As we said goodbye, he leaned in for a hug, and I stiffened. My mind was racing with thoughts of his knife collection, and the way he'd talked about blades like they were living things. When I finally got to my car, I let out a shaky breath and locked the doors. The whole drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the knives. Was I overreacting? Was he just a passionate collector, or was there something darker beneath the surface? The next day, Edward texted me, saying he'd had a wonderful time and would love to see me again. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. I didn't know how to tell him that his obsession with knives had freaked me out, so I simply said, "Thanks for dinner, but I don't think we're a good match." He replied with a polite, "No worries. Take care," and I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a package in the mail. There was no return address, but when I opened it, I found a small knife inside. It was a sleek, delicate blade with a note that read, "A gift for someone as sharp as you." I froze, my heart pounding. I had no idea how he'd gotten my address, and I didn't want to find out. I threw the knife in the trash and blocked his number. Looking back, I can't say for sure if Edward was dangerous or just incredibly intense. Maybe he really was just a passionate collector. But when it comes to dating, sometimes your gut knows better than your heart, and my gut was screaming, "Get out." My sophomore year of college was full of questionable decisions, but one story stands out above the rest as the absolute pinnacle of awkwardness, regret, and just plain weirdness. It all started with a girl I'd been talking to on Tinder. She went to a university about an hour away, and we'd been messaging back and forth for a couple of months. She seemed cool. Things were going pretty well, so when she invited me to her 21st birthday party, I figured why not. She made it sound like it was going to be a huge blowout, and she was adamant that I had to come. She even threw in a few, "It wouldn't be the same without you" messages for good measure. I was sold. Now, I wasn't about to roll up to this party alone, so I convinced 2 of my fraternity brothers to come with me. It was a bit of a road trip, but we figured it'd be a fun night, hit up the party, meet some new people, throw back a few drinks, and maybe make some memories. The 3 of us piled into my buddy's car, hyped ourselves up on the way, and rolled into her college town, ready for a wild night. When we got to the address she gave me, I could tell right away that something was off. The house was quiet, like really quiet. No music, no people spilling out onto the lawn, no sign of the big party she'd promised. My friends and I exchanged a few skeptical glances, but I figured maybe everyone was inside, and the party was just getting started. So we knocked on the door. She answered with a big smile, looking really cute in a party dress. I was optimistic for about 0.2 seconds, until I glanced past her and realized the big party was actually just her and her 2 roommates sitting on the couch. No music, no decorations, no drinks, nothing. Just the 3 of them hanging out, like it was a normal Tuesday night. My friends and I stepped inside, trying to mask our confusion, but the awkward vibes hit us like a brick wall. It got worse. Her 2 roommates weren't drinking, weren't going out, and definitely weren't interested in making conversation with us. So it was just me, my Tinder date, and my 2 fraternity brothers awkwardly trying to salvage the night. We tried everything, beer pong, flip cup, quarters, but the birthday girl refused to participate. At one point, she actually said, Drinking games are illegal. I'm not exaggerating. Those words came out of her mouth. My jaw hit the floor. I was floored. Who says that? Who even thinks that? In that moment, I realized I had made a huge mistake. Realizing we were in the middle of what might be the lamest 21st birthday party of all time, my friends and I decided to call an audible. We hit up our fraternity's chapter at her university, and the guys there were more than happy to have us over. They were throwing an actual party with actual people and actual fun. So, we made plans to head over. Here's where things took another turn. I managed to convince my Tinder date to come with us to the fraternity party, which I thought was a win. Maybe the night could still be saved. But as we were leaving her apartment complex, she saw a cop car parked nearby and completely lost her mind. She started freaking out, saying we were going to get in trouble and insisting we go back to her place. Keep in mind, she had just turned 21, we weren't carrying anything illegal, and there was literally no reason to panic. But she wasn't having it. She was practically shaking, convinced the cops were going to arrest us for walking. At that point, my two friends had already started making their way to the fraternity house, and I was stuck. I couldn't just ditch her, since I was supposed to stay at her place that night. So, I reluctantly told my friends to go on without me, and took one for the team. We went back to her apartment. When we got back, I thought maybe we'd have a drink, talk, and salvage the night somehow. Nope. Instead, she put on the Lizzie McGuire movie. I'm not kidding. There I was, sitting on her couch, watching Hilary Duff sing What Dreams Are Made Of while questioning every single decision that had led me to this moment. I was trying to be a good sport about it, though, and eventually things started to heat up a bit. We started making out, and for a brief second I thought, maybe this isn't so bad after all. Wrong. So wrong. Mid-make-out, she stopped and informed me that she was on her period and wouldn't go any further than kissing. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with setting boundaries. I respect that, but I was already stuck at what felt like the most awkward birthday party ever, and now I was being told that this was as good as it was going to get. I tried to convince her to at least meet me halfway, but she wasn't budging. Instead, she said, "I can do a little trick that'll make you happy." I had no idea what she meant, but curiosity got the better of me. I told her to go for it. Big mistake. She proceeded to lick me. Not in a sexy way. Not in a playful way. No, she licked me from one ear down under my chin, all the way to my other ear. It was the most unsexy, awkward, slobbery thing I have ever experienced in my life. I was stunned. Speechless. I didn't even know how to react. She pulled back, smiled like she'd just done something amazing, and then started doing it again. I told her she could stop, but she didn't. She kept going, licking my face like a dog that had just found peanut butter. I was drenched in slobber. At this point, I was praying for my friends to come back and save me. Hours later, they finally stumbled in, drunk and laughing about the amazing time they'd had at the fraternity party. I shot them a look that said, "We need to leave." Now, we made our exit as early as we could the next morning, and I thought the nightmare was finally over. Oh, but it wasn't. A few hours after we got back to our university, I got a Snapchat from her. It was a picture of her and her two roommates, holding up a condom that had apparently fallen out of my pocket the night before. They were all smiling like it was some kind of trophy. I just stared at my phone, completely mortified. And it gets even better. Over 2 months later, after absolutely zero contact, she messaged me out of the blue and asked, "So, are we going to be boyfriend/girlfriend or not?" To finalize here, yes, I never replied. And I've never used Tinder again. Dating apps are like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you match with someone, and the connection is like instant. Other times, you end up with a story so surreal it feels like a bad rom-com plotline. This is one of those stories, and let me tell you, it's a real doozy. I live in the Midwest, where people pride themselves on being friendly, down-to-earth, and honest. So when I matched with a girl on Bumble, who seemed like the embodiment of Midwest charm, I was hopeful. Her profile was simple and intriguing. A bright smile, a picture of her hugging a golden retriever, and a bio that read, "Lover of sunsets, road trips, and family dinners." We started chatting, and she was every bit as sweet as her profile suggested. Let's call her Emma, shall we? Emma and I messaged for about a week before setting up a date. Our conversations were easy. She was funny, quick-witted, and had this way of making me feel like she was genuinely interested in what I had to say. We bonded over our shared love of hiking in small-town diners, and before long, I was looking forward to meeting her in person. She suggested a local bar for our first date, a cozy place with live music and great cocktails. I liked that she picked the spot. It showed initiative, and it was a place I'd been meaning to check out anyway. The night of the date, I showed up a little early, nerves buzzing but optimistic. When Emma walked in, I immediately recognized her from her photos. She had the same bright smile, the same warm energy. She was even prettier in person, and I couldn't help but feel like I'd hit the jackpot. We hugged hello, ordered drinks, and settled into a booth near the stage. The first half of the date was great. We talked about everything, our jobs, our families, our favorite books and movies. She told me about her job as a social worker and how rewarding it was to help people, even though it could be emotionally draining. I told her about my weekend hiking trips and my ongoing quest to find the best burger in the city. The conversation flowed easily, and I felt like we were really clicking. But then, halfway through the date, something changed. Emma started glancing at her phone more and more. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was checking the time or responding to a quick text. But her expressions grew more serious, and she seemed distracted. I asked if everything was okay, and she gave me a tight smile and said, "Yeah, just a little family thing. Nothing to worry about." I didn't want to pry, so I let it go, but the mood had shifted. She wasn't as engaged in the conversation anymore, and I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Still, I figured maybe she was just having an off moment. Everyone has those, right? About 20 minutes later, she looked at her phone again and suddenly gasped. "Oh no," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "I just got a text from my mom. She's having a medical emergency, and I need to go check on her." I froze for a second, unsure of what to say. "Oh my God, is she okay? Do you need help?" No, it's fine," she said quickly, grabbing her coat and bag. "I just need to get home. I'm so sorry to cut this short." I stood up, still processing what was happening. "Do you want me to drive you? Or call someone for you?" "No, it's okay. I'll call an Uber. Thank you for understanding." And just like that, she was gone. I sat back down, staring at my half-empty glass of beer, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The date had been going so well, and now it was over, just like that. I felt bad for Emma and her mom, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole situation felt off. I finished my drink, paid the tab, and left the bar. As I was walking back to my car, still replaying the night in my head, I spotted Emma. She was just a few blocks away, standing under a street lamp. But she wasn't alone. She was with another guy. They were laughing, her arm hooked around his, and there was no sign of the panic or urgency she'd shown just minutes earlier. My stomach dropped. I stopped in my tracks, staring at them from a distance as reality sank in. There wasn't any family emergency. She'd lied to get out of the date. I felt a mix of emotions, embarrassment, anger, confusion. Mostly, though, I just felt stupid. I'd been duped, plain and simple. I debated confronting her, but decided against it. What good would it do? She clearly wasn't interested, and calling her out would only make things more awkward. Instead, I got in my car and drove home, feeling humiliated and defeated. The next day, I told my friends what had happened. Their reactions ranged from outrage to laughter, with one friend joking, "Well, at least she didn't fake her own death." I tried to laugh it off, but it still stung. I thought about texting Emma to call her out, but I decided it wasn't worth the effort. She'd made her choice, and honestly, I didn't want to waste any more time on someone who clearly wasn't honest. A few days later, though, I got a message from her. "Hey, I had such a great time with you the other night. Would love to see you again soon." I stared at the message, dumbfounded. Was she serious? Did she think I hadn't seen her with that other guy? Or was she just hoping I'd forgotten about the whole family emergency thing? I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the conversation and unmatched her. Looking back, the whole experience was a lesson in trusting my gut. The moment she started acting distracted, I should have known something was up. People don't just suddenly change their demeanor like that without a reason. Dating apps are a wild ride. Sometimes you meet great people, and sometimes you end up with stories like this one. Awkward, frustrating, and a little bit ridiculous. But hey, at least I got a good story out of it. And now, whenever someone mentions a family emergency, I can't help but smile and think, sure, Jan.